Chapter 724. Weight of regret. The battered ship fell from the dim red darkness of the sky, and, illuminated by the eerie radiance of the crimson moon, crashed into the towering steel colossus. The armored beak of the ship's ram struck the giant's chest with such tremendous force that there was a blinding flash of light, and then a powerful shockwave rolled across the island, violently throwing Sonny off his feet. The deafening roar of the impact came as he fell. Rolling on the ground, Sonny was assaulted by the thundering clash of the blast, the rumbling groan of shattering wood, and the booming shriek of heavy metal being ripped apart. Stunned and disoriented, he rose to his knees, then swayed a little and looked up. What he saw made him pale. The sorcerer's ship lay broken on the ground. The fluid lines of its graceful hull were broken and gaped with terrible breaches, wide cracks running through the ancient wood. Its bow was completely shattered, and the damage in the front part of the vessel was especially severe. The beautiful tree growing around its main mast seemed damaged and dead. Cassie was nowhere in sight. At the very edge of the island, thrown back, Sun Prince knelt. The steel colossus was swaying dangerously, clutching at his face with his one remaining hand. At the spot where the ram of the ship had struck, his chest was caved in and ripped open, rivers of molten metal flowing from the terrible wound. And in the depths of the wound, turned incandescent by the heat, a cage made in the form of a human figure was revealed. The cage was slightly broken, too, and a charred hand could be seen clawing at the edges. Under its fingers, the metal was bending like cloth, slowly being torn away. Sonny shuddered and then turned his gaze back to the wreck of the flying ship. Cassie, where's Cassie? He could not see the blind young woman anywhere in the wreckage. However, Sonny saw someone else. A bloodied figure suddenly fell from above, bounced off the ground and crashed into the hull of the ship, causing more cracks to appear on its surface. Raven black hair, pale skin, it was Noctis. The sorcerer did not look good. His whole body was covered in blood, terrible wounds gaping open here and there. His beautiful face was broken and disfigured, the skin split open and white bone visible beneath, with one eye socket empty and full of darkness. He was still alive, though of course he was. Noctis could not escape from the pain into the merciful embrace of death, even if he wanted to. As Sonny watched, paralyzed for a moment, something flashed through the air, and a graceful figure appeared for a split second in front of the sorcerer, her beautiful chestnut hair dancing in the wind. In the next moment, a large portion of the hull of the ship exploded as Noctis was pushed through it by a vicious strike. Both saints disappeared into the darkness of the ancient vessel, which then shuddered, hinting that their dreadful battle continued. Sonny froze, looking between the swaying colossus and the wreckage of the ancient ship. His mind was empty, and he did not know what to do, or rather, he could not decide what took priority. There was not much time to decide, however. Gritting his teeth, he looked around, searching for his friends. Kai seemed to be knocked out by the blast a little, but Effie was already on her feet, staring in the same direction as he. There was a grim expression on her face. Sonny groaned, then slowly stood up. Effie, any ideas? She hesitated for a moment, then flashed him a pale smile. I guess it's this time, he frowned. What time? The young girl glanced at the wreckage and then said wistfully, You know that time when, in the movies, someone says to split up. Sonny stared at her, not entirely understanding what she meant. Effie's gaze slowly shifted to the kneeling colossus, and in a steady voice she said, Give me the knife, the ruby one. I'll deal with the big bastard. You and Kai go and find Cassie, then help the lunatic in that order. He's not going to die any time soon anyway. He stared at her from above, deep shadows veiling his eyes. Sonny had a lot to say, but in the end he simply asked, Are you sure? The young girl laughed. Don't I look like I'm sure? Relax, doofus. It's just an immortal transcendent. We better deal with that thing before it escapes the cage, anyway. Sonny gritted his teeth, then summoned the covetous coffer and handed Effie the knife that they had gotten from the creature in the lake. There was no time to say anything else and no need to. Effie took the knife, gripped his wrist for a moment, and then dashed away without looking back. Sunny helped Kai stand up and, supporting the disoriented archer, hurried toward the wreckage of the crashed ship. As they ran, an ugly expression appeared on his bestial face. "Don't you die on me, you freeloader. Your sleeping pod is still in my house, damn it. Do you even how much hassle it is to properly dispose of a corpse? If you have any conscience, you will stay alive." Behind him, Effie ran to the edge of the island, summoning the dusk shard. As the swirl of sparks surrounded her hand, she jumped up and landed on a toppled pillar that lay parallel to the ground, rising slightly at the far end. The young girl rushed across the long pillar and then leaped high into the air with all her prodigious strength, flying straight toward the kneeling giant's chest. As she flew, Effie activated the single enchantment of the heavy shield. Forged from a shard of a fallen star, this shield contains the weight of the heavens. Depending on the heart of its wielder, it can be light as a feather or heavy as regret. She poured her essence into the memory, making it feel as heavy as a mountain on her hand. A moment later, Effie crashed into the Colossus with all that weight. The impact was not nearly as devastating as when Cassie had brought her ship down from the sky, but since Sun Prince was yet to regain his balance, it was just enough to push his upper body a little bit back. And that little bit was enough to send Sun Prince toppling over. A few seconds later, both of them, the giant immortal and the little girl, disappeared from view, falling over the edge of the island, down into the empty darkness of the sky below. Chapter 725. Shipwreck. Lsland. As Sunny and Kai moved toward the wreck of the ancient ship, the heavenly chains suddenly rattled deafeningly, and the whole island quaked once more as it shifted higher. Turning back, they saw that the steel colossus was gone from the edge. Effie was nowhere in sight as well. Sunny stared at the empty space where the giant had been kneeling not too long ago, then gritted his teeth and looked away. Effie knew what she was doing. No one was more motivated to survive the nightmare and return to the waking world alive. Not even Sunny. She would not have done anything that would leave her no chance to escape. In any case, every one of them was in terrible danger. If Solvin managed to defeat Noctis, she would be coming for them next. And Cassie could have been dying or dead already, somewhere in the wreckage. There was no time to waste on unnecessary thoughts. Sunny dragged Kai forward, lamenting the fact that the archer was coming back to his senses so slowly. His incredible sight would have been very useful right about now. His 4 shadows flew toward the wreck, gliding between the debris in search of the young woman. However, it was hard to make out anything in the chaotic mess of splintered wood, upturned soil, and shredded sails. And then finally, he thought that he noticed weak movement under a pile of debris. With his 2 hearts beating wildly, Sunny rushed forward, then threw a piece of the ship's hull aside and bent down, digging through the soil. Soon he saw a piece of black fabric, and then removed some more dirt to reveal Cassie's pale face. She struggled to sit, and then coughed violently. The blind young woman seemed to be fine. The piece of cloth covering her eyes had slid down, revealing 2 empty eye sockets, and her dress was soaked with blood from the arrow wound on her shoulder, but other than that, there were only mild scratches and lacerations on her body. Miraculously, Cassie was alive. Sunny stared at her with wide eyes, a sense of profound relief slowly spreading through his chest. The young woman coughed some more, wiped the dirt off her face, then turned her head slightly with an uncertain and vulnerable expression. Who is there, Sunny?" He helped Kai sit down, then said, "Yes, it's me, but can't your ability tell?" Cassie grimaced. "I've run out of soul essence. Damnation." A stifled laugh escaped from his mouth. "That's what you are concerned with, you damned fool. What the hell was that stunt? How did you even survive the crash?" Cassie turned to him with a confused expression on her beautiful face. How did I what? I jumped off the ship a few moments before it hit the prince, of course. Dancer carried me down. I am not crazy. He stared at her for a moment, then covered his face with a hand and let out a long, relieved sigh. You've been spending too much time with me. Only a madman would call ramming a flying ship into an immortal steel giant at full speed not crazy. Now that he knew that the blind girl was alive, though, he could finally think about everything else. As cold shivers run down his spine, Sonny turned and stared at the dark gaping hole in the hull of the crashed ship where Noctis and Solving had disappeared. The wreckage was still trembling and groaning, proving that the two transcendents were still fighting inside. Cassie tried to stand up, fell back, then remained motionless for a few moments. What is happening? Sonny grimaced. Effie is dealing with what is left of Sun Prince. Kai is here, but he had the wind knocked out of him. Noctis is also on the island. He seems to be losing to Solving terribly. His shadows returned, wrapping themselves around his body and bringing with them vast and fearsome strength. Sonny lingered for a moment and then stood up. You stay here with Kai and rest for a bit. I'll be back shortly. The blind young woman frowned, then hurriedly fumbled for her blindfold and pulled it up, covering the empty darkness of her missing eyes. Where are you going? He looked at the wreckage for a few moments and then smiled darkly. I am just going to return a debt. He owed Solving quite a lot after all. Months of agony and desperation, the life of a dear friend, and even a heart. When would he get a chance to repay her hospitality again? Leaving Cassie and Kai behind, Sonny gathered his courage and dashed toward the wreck. Jumping through the breach in the hull, he landed on the skewed floor of one of the compartments at the stern of the ship and froze for a moment, hit by a strong sense of déjà vu. All of this, did it not feel very familiar? Was it not the same compartment he had entered the wreck through all that time ago, in the distant future, while hunting for miraculous coins? Of course, back then, the ancient ship had looked vastly different, at least on the inside. It had been infested by a sprawling mass of brown vines and moss, the murky air full of poison they secreted. Back then, Sonny had not known who Noctis was, and how his ship had ended up broken and abandoned on a desolate island near the rift. Well, now everything fell in its place. This island was going to become the Shipwreck Island. The wound in the chest of the giant steel corpse, the terrible damage done to the bow of the crashed vessel, it all made sense now, except for one thing. How would Solving end up trapped for thousands of years in the cargo hold, so that Sonny could kill her in the future? Sonny did not consider his chances in a battle against the living embodiment of war to be very high, but the mere fact of knowing the future told him that it was not impossible to defeat her. At least that was what he wanted to believe, sneaking through the broken ship as he came closer and closer to the sounds of the furious battle. If he was wrong, however, the possibility of Sonny himself becoming the host of a monstrous corrupted parasite was not out of the question. Chapter 726. Sweet release. As Sonny slowly approached the main cargo hold, he felt doubt crawl into his mind. What was he actually doing? A battle between two saints was no place for an awakened, no matter how powerful he had grown after absorbing thousands of shadow fragments and forming the fourth core. The gap in power between Sonny and Solving was just too vast. He had faced her twice in the past, and each time, the War Maiden crushed him without even putting any effort into her attacks. The bitter taste of those defeats still lingered in his mouth. Especially of the second one, when he watched helplessly as she slaughtered Elias in front of his eyes. When he remembered that vile day, his pupils narrowed. An overwhelming feeling of hatred and anger drowned his mind, so scorching and consuming that Sonny was momentarily stunned by the intensity of it. Every wound, every second of torturous pain, every night of quiet desperation he had experienced in the Red Colosseum rose from the depths of his memory, making him feel as if he was reliving all that torment. The memory of the burning sacred grove was there, too, as well as that of an old man crying as he cradled the dead body of his mother in his trembling arms, and that of Elias's bright eyes suddenly turning empty and hollow. The grief, shame, and fury of not having been able to keep his promise and save the young man, Sonny tried to resist the hatred but failed. It was just too vast, deep, and deserved. Solvin had deserved his hatred. She put him in a cage. She tried to make him a slave. Gritting his teeth and suppressing a bestial growl, Sonny continued to move forward. I'll make her pay. It is not impossible. His task was not as hard as he had made it to be. He did not need to defeat Solvin. He just needed to give Noctis an opportunity to defeat her. Anyone could be defeated, anyone could be destroyed. You just had to use the right weapon. Even the gods had not been able to save themselves. Sonny's enemy was an immortal transcendent, but his weapon was an immortal transcendent too. Approaching a familiar door, he summoned the cruel sight, inhaled deeply, and then turned into an incorporeal shadow, sliding noiselessly into the main cargo hold of the broken ship. There, two saints were entangled in a vicious battle. Both Noctis and Solvin seemed to have foregone the use of weapons. Neither had they assumed their transformed forms, preferring to remain in the shape of humans. They were not even using their aspect abilities, unless Sonny simply failed to comprehend the scope and magnitude of what the Transcendents were doing. Instead, the Immortals chose the most direct, intimate, and brutal form of combat. They were fighting with their bare hands. Each strike was devastating enough to crush a mountain, sending destructive shockwaves through the vast cargo hold, and Noctis seemed to be losing terribly. Up close, the sorcerer looked even worse than when Sonny had caught a glimpse of him outside of the ship. He was covered in blood from head to toe, his face broken and missing an eye. One of his cheeks was ripped open, revealing white teeth and making it seem as though Noctis was grinning. The sight of it was both ghastly and disturbing. Noctis looked more like a corpse than a living being, and yet he was still moving. The speed at which the two saints fought was almost too great for Sonny to discern anything, but he could still perceive the sorcerer deflecting some of Solvin's vicious blows and trying to dodge others. Sometimes he even succeeded, but mostly he failed. With each strike that landed on his body, more blood was spilled, more bones were broken with a sickening crunch, and more of what made Noctis himself was destroyed. There was almost nothing left of the beautiful and charming person Sonny had once seen on the surface of a golden coin. Solvin, on the other hand, seemed perfectly fine. Her tantalizing face was calm and slightly sad, her soft skin free of any blemishes, her simple red tunic flawlessly clean. The only indication that she had been locked in a furious fight with another transcendent was that her hands were covered in scarlet blood, becoming of the same color as her garment. His thoughts darkened. Damnation! Sonny hid in the shadows, watching tensely and waiting for his chance to interfere. There had to be a chance, a single instance where a momentary delay in Solvin's onslaught would allow Noctis to turn the tables on the War Maiden. But no matter how long he waited and how closely he watched, the moment never came. Instead, after another blow, Noctis let out a terrible scream and fell to his knees, blood streaming from his mouth. Solvin calmly stepped forward and grabbed him by the hair, jerking the sorcerer's head up so that his mangled face could be seen. With a solemn expression, she raised her bloodied fist to deliver the final blow, and said in a voice that seemed to be more mournful than triumphant, "Is this all? I expected more from you, Noctis. I wished for so much more," as Sonny cursed, and prepared to attack the War Maiden from behind. The sorcerer struggled weakly in her grip. His gaze danced wildly across the cargo hold, as if searching for something to save him. And then, for a short moment, it landed directly at Sonny, making him freeze. Did he imagine it? It seemed as though Noctis looked at him with purpose. It was just a split second, but Sonny was ready to swear that he noticed a silent message in the sorcerer's one remaining eye don't, and that he saw something moving beneath the immortal's skin. Sonny only hesitated for a heartbeat, but by then it was already too late to do anything. Solvin struck, breaking Noctis's ribcage and thrusting her hand into his chest. But then, the war maiden suddenly flinched and jumped back, letting out a quiet yelp. Her bloodied hand was pressed tightly against her body. Noctis, meanwhile, continued to kneel, staring expressionlessly at his broken chest. Then he shifted slightly and let out a long, deep sigh of relief. Ah, this is so much better. So much easier. He looked up, his ghastly grin slowly turning into a sincere one. This was almost worth ruining my attire. Chapter 727. Unforgiven. Suddenly, Noctis seemed different. He was still beaten, mangled, and covered in blood, but the sorcerer's presence subtly changed. If before it was faint and weakening, now it became brimming with power, potency, and free-flowing energy. Vast, furious, unrestrained, and suffused with madness. Despite the fact that Noctis was on his knees and crippled, he suddenly seemed terrifying. The morbid grin on his torn and disfigured face seemed more menacing than pitiful now. His one remaining eye glistened, reflecting the distant light of the crimson moon. It was as though something that had been suppressing the sorcerer's true power all this time finally set him free. Noctis inhaled deeply, and at the same, Solvin suddenly swayed. The hand she had used to crush his ribcage was still pressed against her body, blood streaming down on the red tunic. Her beautiful eyes widened, and then something moved under her skin, making the war maiden let out a pained scream. She staggered back and looked at the kneeling sorcerer with a pale face. What have you done to me?" Noctis smiled. His voice sounded hoarse and full of unfathomable emotion when he spoke. "What else? I have fulfilled your most ardent wish, Solvin. I have defeated you." She stared at him in shock, then suddenly shuddered and let out another tortured scream. As drops of blood flew out of her mouth, the beautiful transcendent stumbled and fell to her knees. Her sublime face was deathly pale and contorted by a grimace of terrible pain. The sorcerer let out a croaking laugh and slowly stood up. Just like that, their roles were reversed. The war maiden was on her knees, and Noctis was looming above her. He lingered for a moment and then looked at the patch of shadows where Sonny was hiding, his mind full of vague suspicion. "You can come out, Sunless. It's safe now." "What the hell?" Sonny hesitated for a few seconds, then assumed his corporeal form and glanced at Solvin, his eyes burning with hatred. Slowly, a few things were clicking in place and starting to make sense. The magical circle in the sorcerer's residence, the river of blood that Noctis had fed to the soil below, the cracks on the stone floor, the tremors that had been running through it from time to time, even the faint scream that had awoken Sonny on his last night in the sanctuary. He turned and stared at the sorcerer, a harrowing guess appearing in his mind. Solvin, however, was still in the dark. As the ghastly movement under her skin grew stronger and more noticeable, she groaned. "What is this thing?" My aspect," Noctis smiled. "Ah, you've noticed. Yes, there is no point in trying to summon your abilities. My little pet is a bit hungry for soul essence, you see. I've been starving it for a few hundred years after all." As he spoke, his own essence flowed freely, coursing through his mangled body. The terrible wounds covering it started to heal at an incredible pace. As Sonny watched, the bloody hole in the sorcerer's chest closed, his shattered ribs coalescing back into proper shape. His torn cheek was already growing back together. A clot of blood formed in his empty eye socket, slowly turning into a new eye. Noctis took a step forward, leaned forward, and looked at Solvin. Then he whispered, "This pet of mine is a very special creature. It is a vine that feeds on powerful souls. The profane seed that eventually birthed it was created when the ashes of the Heart Grove mixed with Ader's blood. You remember Ader, don't you, Solvin? Well, allow me to return her last gift to you." His voice seethed with boundless rage and sorrow. Sonny frowned, then glanced at the sorcerer with a complicated expression. So Noctis had created Wormvine, a corrupted monster capable of devouring saints from the ashes of the sacred grove and Ader's blood. He had kept it in the ground beneath his residence for hundreds of years, nurturing the abomination by feeding it his essence and blood. And then, when the time came, he took it into himself, making his body both the bait and the trap for the person who had desecrated the grove and killed its lady. All this time, the sorcerer was restrained by having to suppress the creature and prevent it from devouring him from the inside. And when the monster finally found a new host, he was finally free to exert his full power. A pale smile appeared on Sonny's face. What a devious, patient, and ruthless vengeance Noctis had envisioned for solving. He could learn a thing or two from the unforgiving sorcerer. The war maiden looked at Noctis for a few moments, then bent in a violent convulsion, letting out a terrible shriek. The skin on her face broke, and a thin, worm-like vine appeared from beneath it, crawling forward through the blood. Another, thicker one burst from her hand. Solving groaned, then let out a stifled chuckle. "Ah, after all this time I am defeated by you," he gritted her teeth, and then suddenly smiled through the pain. "Glory to the beast!" With that, the war maiden struggled to move and arduously reached forward with a trembling hand. A knife carved out of a single piece of wood rested on her bloodied palm. Noctis looked at her for a while, then silently took the knife and straightened, towering above the trembling, suffering woman. He remained motionless for a few moments, darkness veiling his face. Sonny took a step forward, being strangled by hatred. No, no, not yet. Let her scream. Let her suffer more. Let her suffer forever. Killing Solvin was what they had planned. But now, looking at the beautiful, hateful priestess of war, he was unwilling to let her escape that easily. She had wanted this to happen all along. This was her true victory. Sonny's ability to think clearly dissolved, consumed by fury. He had just enough of sense left to realize that this behavior was unnatural, that the intensity of his desire for revenge was unusual, even for someone as spiteful as him, but he did not care. At that moment, the only thing he wanted was to see Solvin pay for what she had taken from him. Noctis looked at the knife, his eyes full of darkness, and then threw it aside, lodging the wooden blade into the wall of the cargo hold. When he spoke, his voice was trembling. "You don't deserve to die, for what you did to us. You don't deserve to die, Solvin. You only deserve to live." Chapter 728. Spiteful Shadow, hearing the cruel words that sentenced Solvin to thousands of years of harrowing torment, Sonny couldn't help but feel a dark, euphoric sense of glee. The memory of pain she had visited upon him and the faces of those she had killed flashed in front of his eyes once again, making that glee grow even sweeter. Good, good. The only thing Sonny regretted was that he had killed Solvin in the distant future, releasing her from that torment. If he had known better back then, he would have left her to rot. Noctis coldly stared at the squirming priestess for a moment and then turned around as if intending to leave. Solvin let out a groan of agony, more vines breaking through her skin and crawling down to the floor. Wait. She struggled to raise her head and look up, her eyes full of fear. "Noctis, you have to kill me. You won't be able to free her if I am alive." Sorcerer stopped, lingered for a moment, and then glanced at her over the shoulder. His face was cold and unmoving. After a long pause, he said nonchalantly, "Hope is a great, powerful demon. She can handle a shackle or two on her own." As Solvin's eyes widened, Noctis looked away and took a step toward the gates of the hold. And Sonny, meanwhile, was doing the hardest thing he had ever done in his life. Sonny was walking toward the edge of the cargo hold, where the wooden knife was lodged into the wall. Every step he made felt as if he was dragging a mountain with him. No, it was much harder than that. A mountain would have been heavy, but dragging it along was a simple task. Hard, or maybe even impossible, but simple nevertheless. However, he was not struggling against physical weight. Instead, Sonny was struggling against his very nature. He had grown up in the outskirts, fighting for his life in a cruel, indifferent world. He had to learn a lot of vicious lessons to survive. Those lessons made him selfish, cynical, and jaded, unwilling to trust anyone or believe in anything. Those qualities had helped him to remain alive, but as his life changed, some of them turned into a hindrance. Slowly and painfully, he had shed his previous skin and learned new things. He learned to trust those who deserved to be trusted and have hope in himself and the future. However, one thing he never managed to leave behind and did not really want to was his spite. Spite had been the only thing that motivated him to survive the first nightmare after all. Back then, and maybe even now, it was his only reason to live. And so, Sonny was not big on forgiveness. He could not even forgive Cassie, at least not fully, despite everything that they had been through together before and after her decision to put Neff's life before his own. He believed in the value of retribution. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. That was the ancient law. No one should be able to trample on him and remain unpunished. That was why the very thought of letting Solvin die in peace seemed abhorrent to him, and yet, his trembling hand landed on the handle of the wooden knife. Sonny was a very stubborn person. Gritting his teeth, he dislodged the knife from the wall and swayed a little, struggling to keep the all-consuming hatred that drowned his mind at bay. Yes, he wanted Solvin to pay, he wanted her to suffer. But, even more than that, he wanted fate to go to hell. He could not allow for another thing to happen just like it had happened in the real past. He needed to prove, once and for all, that he was not a marionette that hung powerlessly from the strings of fate, able only to dance to a predetermined tune. He was also really outraged at the thought of hope messing with his mind. And this was where the scorching intensity of his hatred for the War Maiden had come from, without a doubt from the poisonous influence of the demon of desire, who had taken his trauma, sorrow, and anger and turned it into a weapon to subjugate him. It was a weird thing to know that his fury was fabricated, but at the same time welcome it and be tempted to surrender to it. And that temptation, it was way harder to overcome than the weight of a mountain. Why am I even doing this? She deserves to suffer. Wouldn't it be splendid to leave her to suffer? Wouldn't it be the most joyous thing ever? Oh, it would. I can't imagine anything sweeter. Sonny struggled to even remember why he was holding the knife. Oh, right, fate. I did promise to destroy it, didn't I? That was because my fate is to be a slave. I don't really want to be a slave, but who cares? I want Solvin to be tortured for eternity much more than I want to be free. Freedom is distant and abstract. Who even wants it? But retribution, it's right here and feels so wonderful. Gritting his teeth, he made a step forward. Step, another step. Walking across the cargo hold of the broken ship was much harder than it had been to climb a cold, dark mountain in chains. He wasn't sure that he was going to make it. His face was contorted by an ugly grimace and his dark eyes burned with mad glee. Then Sonny stopped. I change my mind. It is worth it. Surrendering to fate is worth it if it means that this hateful witch will be tortured endlessly. This will be right. This will be just. This will be the best outcome of all. Sonny sighed and smiled with relief. Now that he decided to surrender to fate, it was as though a terrible weight was lifted from his shoulders. He was free to bask in the joy of revenge, revel in it. He was unburdened, ecstatic, and at peace. Sonny smiled and thrust the wooden knife into Solvin's chest. Damnation. Yes, leaving the War Maiden to suffer felt right and just. But Sonny had never been righteous and did not really care about being just. And more importantly than that, he wanted to spite fate much more than he wanted to avenge himself on Solvin. The beautiful priestess shuddered and looked at him with pain and relief mixing in her mesmerizing eyes. Then her gaze slowly turned empty, losing the spark of life, and her body fell to the floor. Sonny grimaced, feeling bitterly disappointed. He was not happy with his choice at all. He felt terrible, but it had to be done. As the wooden knife broke in his hand, the spell whispered, "You have slain a transcendent human, Solving. Your shadow grows stronger. You have received a memory," he blinked. "Huh, another memory? How does it even work?" And then Sonny suddenly felt really uncomfortable, as if someone was staring at his back. He turned around slowly and met the sorcerer's dark gaze. Noctis looked at him and then bared his teeth in a dangerous smile. "Sunless, what did you do?" Sonny shivered, suddenly feeling very cold. Crap, Chapter 729. Broken Shackles. Noctis stood in the darkness of the cargo hold, looking at Sonny with a dangerous, cold smile. One of his eyes glinted with pale moonlight, the other, still suffused with blood, with a mad red glow. The air around them became cold, the darkness grew deeper. Sonny trembled a little, then glanced at the broken wooden knife in his hand. Now that the tool created by the Lord of Light had served its purpose, it was empty and mundane, the ocean of radiant energy and the string of fate long gone from within it. He dropped the remains of the knife on the floor, glanced at the sorcerer with a dour expression, and said nonchalantly, "I killed her." "Why?" Noctis stared at him for a few moments, then took a deep breath. "I've been planning and waiting for this moment for a very long time, you know. Hundreds of years, really. And you just went and ruined it all. Ah, Sunless, we are friends, but I'll be honest, I am a little bit cross right now." Something shifted in the darkness, and the walls of the cargo hold groaned. The sorcerer continued to stare at him, his red eye glowing brighter and brighter. Sonny himself winced, feeling the sorcerer's presence crash into him like a wave. Then he pretended to look unimpressed, took a step forward and shrugged. "Well, get over yourself." Noctis blinked. Then he tilted his head a little. Then he stopped smiling. "Get over myself." It did not seem like he liked that answer at all. Sonny nodded. "Yeah, snap out of it and get over yourself." He pointed at the body of Solvin and frowned. "First of all, do me a favor and remember why we started all this mess in the first place. It was to kill the Chain Lords and free Hope." "Oh, look, a dead Chain Lord. Isn't it wonderful?" He smiled, revealing his sharp fangs. However, Noctis remained unmoved, still staring at him with a frightening coldness. Sonny took another step forward and pointed a finger at his chest. "Second of all, aren't you too full of yourself? Ader's last gift, really. He judged that if there was a moment when the Transcendent would simply kill him with one strike, it would have been now." So, despite the smile, Sonny was actually trembling inside. Nox gritted his teeth. "What's wrong with that?" Sonny crossed his arms. "Who are you to deliver gifts on her behalf? Unlike the two of us, Lady Ader had no hatred for Solvin. In fact, she was grateful to her. She swore to carry that debt of gratitude to the Shadow Realm. Even I saw it all in one of the nightmares you had sent me into." The corner of the sorcerer's twitched. "You are lying. Why would she?" Sonny shook his head. "I never lie." "Lady Ader was the first of the eternal Shackles to question your duty, wasn't she? She came to the conclusion that Hope should be liberated, and that was where you got that idea." "From her," he sighed. "Well, who has done more to make it happen than Solvin? Without her, Hope's prison would still have been perfect. The Chain Lords wouldn't have been driven to desperation and madness, and we wouldn't be standing here, trying to break the chains that bind desire." Sonny grimaced and looked away, still in the throes of crushing regret about gifting Solvin an easy death. "So, as much as it pains me to admit, in a sense, Solvin is the true architect of this rebellion. She made Lady Ader's desire come true, and although I would have loved to let her suffer for an eternity, our task comes first." Noctis remained motionless for a while, staring into the distance. The mad light in his eyes seemed to subside a little. Then he shifted slightly and glanced at Sonny. His voice sounded grim. "I suggest you run, Sunless." Sonny froze. Crap, it didn't work. He took a step back and shuddered, staring at the sorcerer with fear. Noctis, wait, what I meant to say was," the sorcerer shook his head. "No, you idiot, I'm not going to kill you, but have you stopped to think what would happen if Solvin dies?" Sonny raised his eyebrows. was a bit preoccupied. Wait, what? Noctis glanced at the body of the war maiden and backed away, too. The wormvine. It doesn't have a host anymore, you foolish shadow. So run. Some distance away, at the edge of the island, a small hand appeared from the darkness. A young girl in battered armor struggled to grab something, then pulled herself up, fell on the grass, and remained motionless, staring at the dark sky. Her small body was covered in burns and lacerations. The bronze armor shredded so thoroughly that it was falling apart, slowly turning into dimming sparks of light. She was severely wounded, drained of essence, and exhausted, but she was alive. Effie stared at the stars, too tired to move. Feeling pain course through her badly burnt body, she winced slightly and then whispered quietly, "Oh, you should have seen the other guy." A pale smile appeared on her bloodied face. Far below, a giant steel carcass was swaying in the wind, its leg tangled in a heavenly chain that the colossus had broken as he fell. His chest was split open, and deep within it, a half-open cage in the form of a human figure was slowly turning cold. Sun Prince was dead as well. Now only 2 chain lords remained. Sunny and Noctis left the cargo hold of the ancient ship in a hurry, barely escaping the wormwine. Behind them, the brown vines were already crawling across the floor, growing in size with each second, hungry to find a source of soul essence to devour. Noctis did not seem too enthusiastic about the prospect of fighting his own creation, and neither was Sunny. The last time, he had destroyed the corrupted monster by killing its host, but this time, he himself ran the risk of becoming the host. It was better to retreat and choose their battle wisely. Very soon, they climbed on the hull of the broken vessel and lingered there for a few moments, looking up. Above them, the remaining ships of the defending fleet hovered in the air, for some reason reluctant to approach and continue their relentless onslaught. There were still around 40 ships left, but perhaps stunned by the death of their commanders or afraid of the sorcerer, the enemies remained in place. Then, as if following an order, the ships turned and flew back toward the Ivory City. Sunny frowned. "They are retreating." He glanced at Noctis, unsure of what was happening. The sorcerer stared at the sky for a few more moments and then sighed. "Well, I have good news and bad news." Sunny did not like the sound of it at all. "What is it?" Noctis smiled. "The good news is that the eclipse is ending." And indeed, as soon as he said it, the crimson hue of the night sky changed. Looking up, Sunny saw that the shadow was leaving the surface of the moon, which was returning to its usual silver color. Its position, though, suddenly, he felt a very, very bad premonition. "What's the bad news?" Noctis silently pointed east. Turning around, Sunny saw a line of pale lilac painting the sky above the horizon as the edge of the sun slowly appeared from the darkness of the sky below. The sorcerer grinned. "The night is over. It's a new day." Chapter 730. Dying Wish. Sunny watched the sun appear over the eastern horizon, his heart's growing cold. His vertical pupils narrowed and his fists clenched. The night was over. Had it been that long already? He had lost the track of time during the vicious battle in the skies, but it seemed as though their desperate assault on the flying fleet had only taken a second. But in reality, of course, it had not. He slowly turned to Noctis, whose battered face had almost healed and was now calm and carefree again. The sorcerer was looking at the sky with a strangely neutral expression. "Remind me, wasn't the plan to defeat Sevras before dawn, when he was devoid of his vast and terrifying powers?" The immortal sighed. "Well, it's good to have a plan, however, plans rarely go as you want them to go." Sunny gritted his teeth. "So, what happens now? How are you going to deal with the dragon?" Noctis shrugged. "He must be really, really angry right now. After all, we just killed his brother, the only person Sevras still cares about in this world. Congratulations, by the way. I really did not expect you." Sunny interrupted him with a low growl. "Get to the point. Now that the sun is rising, your powers will be diminished, while his will reach their peak. How are we going to survive?" The sorcerer remained silent for a few moments, then scratched the back of his head. I will come up with something. Sonny stared at him in disbelief. You are joking, right? Come on, you must have some devious trick up your sleeve. You have an incredible advantage after all. You have the knife that can make him mortal while he doesn't have yours. Should I give you the knives? You have never asked me for the damned knives. Wasn't that the reason you befriended me in the first place? Noctis looked at him for a while, then simply shook his head. No, that was not the reason, Sunless. In any case, giving me the knife won't do much good. I will still have to defeat Sevras whether he becomes mortal or not. Either I subdue him and we can use the knife to finish the job, or he subdues me and then there's no point. And I really don't have any tricks left. He smiled and then added wistfully, except one. Sonny exhaled with relief. Finally, what is it? The sorcerer turned to him with a smile. Why, it's you, Sunless, of course. Did I not say that fate brought us together for a reason? Sonny stared at him, his expression slowly turning dark. You didn't, but what the hell do you mean? Noctis looked away at the beautiful silhouette of the flying city. After a few moments he said, no matter how my battle with Sevras goes, it will end near the ivory tower. One of us will fall, maybe it will be him and maybe it will be me. However, that doesn't matter. He sighed and then glanced at Sonny. As long as one of us dies, there will be only one chain left. It won't hold hope for long. So, Sunless, my dear friend, Noctis lingered for a moment and then smiled. Should I lose, I want you to kill me. That is my desire. The sorcerer looked at him, the smile disappearing from his face. Then he said softly, that is the fate I spoke about. You are my death, Sunless, didn't you know? Then Noctis suddenly cleared his throat and awkwardly looked away. That is if I lose, of course. Don't kill me by mistake if I win. That would be very inconvenient, a bit funny, though. Sonny glared at him for a while, then faced the ivory city and scoffed. I know, you'd better win then. As the moon disappeared and the sky slowly grew brighter, Noctis and the members of the cohort gathered together and silently watched the sun rise. The five of them had just accomplished something truly impossible. They had battled an army and two immortal transcendents under the dim light of the crimson moon, and won. The army had retreated, the immortals were dead, and the five of them, somehow, were still alive. And yet, none of them felt relieved or triumphant. The incandescent disk of the sun was rising like the blade of a guillotine, ready to cut down their lives. The sorcerer was sitting on the grass with his eyes closed, gathering his strength for the approaching fight with the ivory dragon and trying to recover from his wounds as much as he could. Effie lay on the ground, too battered and tired to move. Cassie was tending to her wounds. Kai was grimly counting the arrows he had managed to gather. His charred mask was gone, revealing his burned, disfigured face. Sonny was standing a small distance away, looking at a small statuette that lay in the palm of his hand, connected to a thin chain. The statuette was cast of iron and depicted a beautiful young woman wielding a spear in one hand and gripping a human heart in the other, her nakedness covered only by a beast hide tied around her thighs, her face lost in the shadows. It was very similar to the statue of war god he had seen on his first day in the nightmare, but different in one detail. There was blood flowing from the wound in the statuette's chest, as though the heart she was holding had once belonged to the young woman herself. Her figure felt strangely familiar. This was the memory he had received for killing Solving the second time. The runes read, Memory, Dying Wish, Memory Rank, Transcendent, Memory Tier, I Memory Type, Charm. Memory description. A young woman once wished to be free but could only find her freedom in death. She called upon it, and touched by her sincerity, death came. But instead of embracing it herself, the young woman delivered death to those who held her in chains. Memory enchantments, Death Wish. Enchantment description. Those who witness the wielder of this memory are compelled, friends to be inspired, foes to seek the wielder out. The power of the memory grows the more enemies they give the gift of death, and can be consumed to heal the wielder's wounds. Death charge, 0/1000. Sunny hesitated for a bit, and then dismissed the charm with a sigh. This new powerful memory of his could be extremely useful, without a doubt, especially its ability to bring him back from the brink of death. However, he suspected that he would have to kill 1,000 enemies to make that healing really worthwhile. It was still a powerful ability to have, but not in the current situation. He would have to build the charm's charge up for a long time to make use of it. For now, there was only one kill he was concerned about. He was going to deliver the killing blow to either Noctis or the Ivory Lord. As if answering his thoughts, a sudden movement attracted his attention out there in the Ivory City. And then a thundering roar split the world apart. The dragon was coming. Chapter 731. Child of the Sun, Child of the Moon. Sunny shuddered, turning his head to the center of the Ivory City. The thunderous roar that just rolled across the flying islands chilled him to the bone, making both of his hearts stutter. The voice of Sevras, the Ivory Dragon, was filled with so much sorrow, wrath, and madness that every dire horror Sunny had experienced in the Kingdom of Hope paled in comparison. It was like the voice of death itself, coming to drag them down to hell. Taking an involuntary step back, he looked at Noctis and asked hoarsely, Wasn't he supposed to be the sanest of the Chain Lords? The sorcerer slowly opened his eyes, remained motionless for a moment, and then rose to his feet. He was. Noctis glanced in the direction of the sky below, where the corpse of the Sun Prince swayed forlornly, tangled in the chains. He's not anymore, though. As all of them watched, a gargantuan silhouette rose above the city. Sun glistened on the ivory scales of the great beast, and as he moved through the sky, a deep shadow covered streets and houses. The dragon was much more beautiful, majestic, and terrifying than Sunny could have ever imagined. It radiated a feeling of power and holiness that was so intense that it reached across dozens of islands and crashed into them like a wave, making the members of the cohort pale. Sevras looked more like a creature of myth than an actual monster. In fact, calling him a monster would have been unthinkable. Whatever the nightmare creatures were, he was the opposite. His mighty body, his white scales, his shining eyes, his terrible maw, all of it was suffused with profound and dreadful splendor. The whole body of the great beast was surrounded by a golden halo of divinity, which only Sunny could see. And all of that immeasurable power, all of that immolating fury, all that inhuman madness was aimed at them. Only Noctis remained indifferent, looking at the approaching dragon with a steady gaze. Sunny's face grew dark. "You are going to fight that?" The sorcerer lingered for a moment, then glanced at him and smiled. He finally lost his mind. A mindless enemy is not too terrible to face. With that, Noctis took a step forward and glanced over his shoulder. He said in a wistful tone, "Remember your promise, my friend." In the next moment, the figure of the sorcerer shimmered and then disappeared, turning into a torrent of pure light. Sunny and the rest looked at the river of beautiful light that suddenly surged forward, pale under the bright radiance of the sun. All of them suddenly felt something moving in their hearts, as if they were touched by the presence of true divinity, as if they were witnessing something sacred. As the pale light rose to meet the white dragon, it flowed and swirled, shaping itself into the form of a colossal, ghostly wolf. On his forehead, a shape of a crescent moon shined radiantly. The wolf, whose body was weaved of moonlight, opened its maw and let out a deafening howl. Then, he collided with the frenzied dragon and was obliterated. He was made out of nothing but ethereal light, after all. But although the shape of the wolf was broken, the light remained. It washed over Sevras and clung to his scales, 10,000 radiant fangs sinking into them at the same time. It was as though the dragon was fighting a boundless swarm of fireflies instead of a single beast. Sevras roared in pain and then twisted his long neck. A stream of annihilating flame shot out of his maw, destroying thousands upon thousands of motes of light. Drops of sizzling blood fell to the ground from the skies. Sunny stared up, paralyzed by the mind-boggling scale and otherworldly sight of the heavenly clash. Beast of twilight, for better or for worse, he had no time to observe the fight between descendants of the gods. In this battle, he had a role to play too. With a sigh, Sunny turned his gaze to the beautiful Ivory City and dashed forward. He had to enter the Ivory City. In the future, the Shipwreck Island had been connected to the Twisted Rock and then to nothing, directly bordering the rift after the small island crumbled into the sky below. However, this had not happened yet. The rift did not even exist. Instead, it bordered the Ivory City. Sunny jumped down to the heavenly chain, realizing that he had traversed this one already, once. Back then, it had been rusted and sick, being slowly devoured by chain worms. The mordant mimic had run across it, escaping the awakening wormvine while Sunny pursued. Now, the heavenly chain looked as good as new. Trying to conserve his essence, Sunny held off on turning into a shadow and simply ran forward. With his 4 cores and the augmentation of 4 shadows, his speed was nothing short of staggering, especially because he used his long upper arms to propel himself forward as well, running more like a beast than like a human. As the 4-armed devil shot across the chain, the 2 transcendents continued their fight in the skies. He caught glimpses of it from time, or simply felt powerful shockwaves travel through the air, making his bones tremble and the heavy chain sway. The dragon was still enveloped by the swarm of light, spewing streams of fire to burn it away. The light, however, constantly moved, breaking apart and coalescing together, changing shape, and causing more and more pain to the great beast. Sometimes the colossal form of the ghostly wolf appeared for a short moment to deliver a vicious attack, then dissolved again to avoid retaliation. It seemed as though Noctis was just one mistake away from being gravely wounded and broken by the dragon's flames. And yet he was not making any mistakes. Fighting with a devious cunning and fierce will, the sorcerer always seemed one step ahead of Sevras, but with every flash of annihilating fire, a small part of him was destroyed. Sunny did not know how much longer Noctis would be able to hold, and for that reason, his task was growing more and more pressing. He had to reach the ivory tower before one of the saints fell. Chapter 732. Sevras. As the battle between the ivory dragon and the beast of twilight grew more and more devastating, Sunny raced across the heavenly chain and approached the walls of the Ivory City. Up above, Sevras and Noctis continued to rip each other apart, their fury terrible enough to shatter the sky. Effie was in no condition to fight, and Cassie had exhausted all of her soul essence. She had been battered during her escape from the falling ship, as well, so the 2 of them stayed behind, taking care of each other. There were only 2 members of their small cohort still capable of diving into the battle, Sunny and Kai. Each had their own task, and had gone their own way to complete it. From now on and maybe until the very end of the nightmare, Sunny would be on his own. Summoning the Dark Wing, he pushed his way to the top of the city wall and remained there for a moment, hiding in the shadow of a graceful guard tower. The Ivory City lay beneath him, bathed in sunlight. It was as beautiful as he had remembered, even more so up close. The graceful buildings were constructed of pristine white stone, with vibrant green vines crawling up their walls. Here and there, sparkling water murmured as it flowed through carved channels. Incredible aerial bridges and arching aqueducts connected dozens of flying islands together. Now that the sun had risen, thousands upon thousands of people poured onto the streets. All of them looked healthy and beautiful, their tan, dewy skin covered by white garments. Sunny could imagine Elias growing up happily in this beautiful place, in this paradise built on blood. Right now, Every person in the Ivory City was looking up at the sky, fear and awe mixing on their faces. With eyes burning with zeal, all of them were whispering prayers. "May the sun shine upon you, Lord Severax. Bless us, Ivory Dragon. Protect us, protect us." Their prayers rose like a sea, battering into the crazed dragon that roared in sorrow and pain as the ruthless light bit into him again and again, drawing blood and driving him even deeper into the madness. Suddenly, Sonny shivered. He remembered what Noctis had told him once about the noble, valiant, and wise Sevras, the Ivory Lord. That he was both the sanest of them all, and the closest to utter madness. Sevras had resisted hope longer than any other chain lord, but it was precisely for that reason that he was the most susceptible to her poison. Due to his uncompromising resilience, he had maintained most of his sanity intact, and so had never had a chance to build up a tolerance for the insidious influence of the demon of desire over the ages. Now that the death of Sun Prince pushed him over the edge, everything that Sevras had been stalwartly keeping suppressed broke out of control and flooded his mind in an instant. Hundreds of years of harrowing struggle, crashing into the bastion of his sanity all at once. Noctis had also said that the Ivory Lord both loved and hated his people, that they were a burden that weighed heavily on his soul, one which he could not escape due to his sense of duty. That they had bound the dragon to themselves with their faith, their devotion, their trust, and their dependency. Looking down, Sonny saw a wide square directly under the section of the wall he was hiding at. It was crowded with thousands of people, all staring at the sky with faith and hope shining in their eyes. Slowly, another image appeared in front of his eyes. The visage of the twisted rock as it had been in the future. All of its surface had been nothing but an uneven expanse of dark stone. That stone, however, had looked really strange. It was as if once a long time ago it had been melted by unimaginable heat and then solidified again, creating strange shapes and swirls. Here and there blackened bones had protruded from the molten stone, telling the tale of countless humans and beasts who had drowned in that scorching inferno. The sight of them was eerie and disturbing, like something torn from the actual hell. He paled. Below him, the citizens of the Ivory City prayed, "Protect us! Protect us!" In the next moment, the dragon roared as he received an especially painful wound, beads of crimson blood rolling down his ivory scales. Losing the last crumbs of sense, he twisted in the air to better see his enemy and breathed out a torrent of immolating flame. However, his enemy was too cunning. Noctis had positioned himself between the dragon and the crowded streets, hoping to use the city below as a shield or maybe hoping to taunt Sevras into destroying it. The cruel trap had worked. The stream of pale light danced out of the way of the river of fire which fell down and engulfed the square a moment later. Sonny staggered back. In an instant, thousands of people were burned to death, their flesh turning to ash. The square became a scorching inferno, with even the stone itself melting and turning into incandescent lava. Cries of pain and horror filled the air. Some of the people survived and tried to flee, but the fire was everywhere around them. There was no escape. This was the response the Ivory Lord sent to their prayers. Horrified, Severax froze in the air and looked down, shock swirling in his radiant, bestial eyes. Sonny could practically see an internal struggle that happened in the muddled mind of the magnificent dragon. For a short moment, the light of reason grew brighter in his eyes, and then it became fully extinguished. Not caring any more and longing for freedom, the dragon let out another furious roar, and then breathed out a powerful stream of fire, destroying a small part of the hateful enemy, but also drowning several streets of the Ivory City in flames. Sonny stared at the slaughter petrified, but then shook his paralysis off. It did not matter how vile and tragic the fate of the Ivory Dragon and his city had turned out to be. All that matters was that he now had to get through the burning hell below himself. With a low growl, Sunny summoned the memory of fire into the mantle of the underworld and jumped down. There was not much time left. Chapter 733. Lnferno. As two immortals fought in the sky above the Ivory City, more and more of it became engulfed in fire. Driven mad by grief, pain, and the terrible weight of his endless life, the noble dragon had lost the last of his sanity. In his frenzy to destroy the elusive, hateful enemy, he brought down a deluge of immolating flame upon the beautiful city. The loss of life was tremendous. The suffering of dying people was indescribable. The heat was unbearable. Thousands died in the fire, and thousands more were being burned to ash with every minute. Panic and horror drowned the whole city, turning its citizens into a mindless mob. They tried to run, trampling countless people to death, only to be swallowed by the flame in the next second. The buildings of white stone were melting like candles, and graceful aerial bridges that connected the island were crumbling into the abyss. Suffering, death, and destruction reigned supreme. And above all of it, the ivory tower stood, sublime and heartlessly indifferent. Sunny traversed the dying city, witnessing the apocalyptic sight of its terrible demise. As he moved through the burning alleyways and streets, it seemed as though the whole world coming to the end. He was surrounded by smoke, fire, and an echoing cacophony of human screams, assaulted from all sides by the ghastly smell of burning flesh and the pervasive feeling of desperate primal fear. The Lord of Light was the God of creation, but he was also the God of destruction. Today, this aspect of his descended upon the doomed city in all its harrowing glory. Sunny himself was one mistake away from being destroyed. He was running through the burning nightmare, sticking to shadows where he could and using smoke to hide his presence from the panicking mob. With his powerful claws and talons, it was not hard for him to scale buildings or propel himself off their walls to stay above the crowd. Reaching the edge of an island, he could use a bridge, an aqueduct, or a heavenly chain to reach the next one. Sunny was fast and powerful enough to save himself from the fires that were swiftly spreading through the Ivory City, devouring flesh and stone with equal hunger. However, nothing was going to save him if Sevras unleashed a river of flame on his head. Not even the mantle of the underworld was going to survive a direct clash against the dragon's flame for more than a second. All he could rely on were his intuition and quick reaction. Reaching the edge of a large building's roof, Sunny prepared to leap over the street below, but then staggered back and dove into the shadows, appearing a dozen meters away. A split second later, a pillar of raging flame fell from above, erasing the building he was aiming for from existence and taking the whole street with it. The roof he was standing on was cut in half, and the whole structure shuddered, starting to collapse into the sweltering inferno. The path forward was cut off by the annihilating fire, forcing him to change his course. Cursing, Sunny dashed to the side, jumped down, and glanced at the sky. Surprisingly, Noctis was still resisting the frenzied dragon. The river of light that his transformed form consisted of looked pale and weak in the overbearing radiance of the sun. The aura of terrifying might that emanated from Sevras made it seem even more inadequate. The difference in power between the two was clear and immense. And yet the beast of twilight was holding his own. Now that the Ivory Lord had succumbed to madness and abandoned all reason, he had turned into a mindless beast. A great one, but a beast nevertheless. Despite being at a tremendous disadvantage, the sorcerer was using his cunning and devious malice to stay one step ahead of the enemy. Constantly moving and shifting its form, the pale light swirled around the dragon and seeped between his scales to relentlessly bit into his flesh. Even though each wound was small and inconsequential, they brought the beast a lot of pain. From time to time, the light coalesced into the giant wolf and sank its fangs into the dragon, shattering the scales directly. Noctes was also always careful to position himself between Severax and the Ivory City, forcing the crazed chain lord to cause more and more destruction. The more pain Severax experienced, the more of his beloved city he destroyed, the deeper his madness and desperation grew, and the less reason remained in his damaged mind, making it easier for the ruthless sorcerer to fight him. The countless tiny wounds he delivered to the dragon were slowly starting to accumulate. However, Noctes was being damaged himself as well. Although he was able to dodge most of the flame, each time, a small part of him was irrevocably destroyed. The light that constituted him looked much paler already. Sonny simply could not tell who was going to win this terrible battle. He had to be prepared for both outcomes. Just as Noctes had told him, as the two clashing transcendents circled in the sky, they slowly moved toward the ivory tower. Sonny was getting closer to it, too. He had already traversed half a dozen islands, somehow managing to suffer only a couple of serious burns. Now only a few chains separated him from the great pagoda itself. As he climbed onto the last island before the one he was aiming for, a terrible roar suddenly thundered from above, making the whole world shudder. Falling to his knees, Sonny pressed his hands against his ears and looked up, stunned. What he saw made him freeze in shock. The great dragon Severax was falling. His ivory scales were painted red, and a large chunk of flesh was missing from his neck. A river of sizzling blood was flowing from the terrible wound, and one of his mighty wings seemed to be broken. Unable to support his weight in the air, the dragon plummeted from the skies and crashed heavily into the ivory island, raising a cloud of dust and disappearing from view. Sonny swayed, then slowly stood up. See, crazy bastard, he actually did it. Noctes had won. Turning around, he searched the sky and saw the form of a ghostly wolf being engulfed in flame. The pale light was being swiftly devoured by it and then disappeared entirely. Instead, a small human figure fell down, landing somewhere far away in the city. He knew that Noctes was still alive. The sorcerer was immortal after all. However, Sonny doubted that he would be able to recover any time soon. It did not matter, though. The sorcerer had already done his part. Severax was mortally wounded, and all that remained was to thrust the knife into his flesh, making the wound actually kill him. Sonny dashed forward. The ivory tower loomed above him, obstructing the sky. He just had to reach the edge of the island and traverse one last chain to approach its foundation. The island he was currently traversing was devoid of any buildings. Instead, there was just one tall, jagged piece of white rock protruding from its center, with soot-covered chains hanging from it. Not paying it any attention, Sonny ran to the aerial bridge that led to the ivory island. As he approached it, however, he slowed down and then stopped completely. A lone human figure was sitting on the steps leading to the bridge. The stranger was relaxed and seemingly unconcerned by the titanic battle that had just taken place. With his back turned to the ivory tower, the man was looking directly at Sonny, waiting for him. Chapter 734. Final obstacle: the ivory island was separated from the rest of the city by a wide chasm. Once it had been connected to 7 islands by 7 unbreakable chains. Now only 2 remained. There had been several arching bridges leading to it as well, but most of them long collapsed. Only one still stood, arching and monumental, built of pristine white stone. An old man with a wrinkled face and gray hair was sitting on the steps leading to the bridge, dressed in a white tunic. It was different from the clothes most of the citizens wore, resembling that of a priest. The man had a frail body and pale blue eyes. The old man's face was strangely calm. He observed the burning city with solemn indifference, as if the weight of years made him numb to the cruelties of the mortal realm. Even though his world was ending, the elder remained poised and dignified. Noticing the approaching devil, the old man tiredly leaned on his cane. "Stop, creature. This is a sacred land. You are not allowed to go further. Sonny stopped a few meters away from the stranger and studied him for a few moments. Then he sighed and said, his voice even, "Why the charade? Drop it, Mordred." The old man looked at him with confusion, then suddenly grinned. His whole presence suddenly shifted, becoming much more energetic and unrestrained. He laughed dryly and then shook his head. "Ah, what a pity. What gave me away?" Sonny shrugged. "I knew that you would show up sooner or later, and there's not much of later left." Mordred, who inhabited the old and frail body, smiled. "True, true. Thank you very much, Sunless. You have fulfilled my request to keep Noctis alive very well. In fact," his face darkened a little, "I'd say that you even performed a little bit too well. Who could have thought that the Beast of Twilight would still win despite not having the Night Oracle's support? It makes me feel as though all my ordeals in the north were a bit silly." The old man sighed but then smiled again. "Well, no matter. It can still be salvaged. However, I was very serious. Sorry to say this, but you can't go any further, Sunless." Sonny tilted his head a little, staring at Mordred with a dark expression. "Oh yeah, how are you going to kill that damned dragon without my knife? I am sure you know that I visited the Temple of the Chalice." The old man gave him a polite nod. "Oh, I do. That was rather spectacular. But Sunless, you see, that is exactly why I can't allow you to cross that bridge." Sonny frowned. "What do you mean?" "Why?" Mordred looked at him with surprise. "Well, because I need Sevras alive, of course. Killing him would ruin months of torturous effort I put into preparing everything. Remaining in this feeble body all that time was not very pleasant, you know, but there are very few people that the Ivory Lord allows to tend to him, and this priest was the best choice." Sonny gritted his teeth, then uttered with frustration, "Keep Noctis alive, keep Sevras alive, damn it." "What the hell do you actually hope to achieve, Mordred? You are clearly not planning to free Hope. What else can end this nightmare? What do you want?" The old man blinked a couple of times, confusion appearing on his face. "Free Hope," he thought for a moment, then shook his head with a smile. "Of course I am not here to free Hope. That is not the reason why I entered this seed." His smile twisted slightly, a disturbing glint igniting in his eyes. "I am here to kill her." As the words echoed in the silence, Sonny stared at the frail old man with a deep frown. Then he threw his head back and laughed. "Kill her, kill Hope. Have you completely lost your mind, Mordred?" The banished prince shifted slightly, then said in a neutral tone, "Not completely." Sonny clenched his fists, then shook his head in indignation. "She is a demon, you fool, a divine being, a god. How are you, a mere awakened, going to kill her? How can you hope to even scratch her?" Mordred shrugged, then looked at him with a friendly smile. "Why, have you never wanted to kill a god?" Sonny stared at him with wide eyes. "I am of a rather high opinion of myself, but I am not delusional. I know my limits, Mordred, don't you?" The old man sighed. "It's not like killing a god is impossible. They are all dead after all. However, I understand your concern. I would not have wanted to face the demon of desire in battle." He lingered for a moment and then added, "But she is not exactly able to fight right now, is she? She is bound, sapped of most of her powers, imprisoned for 1,000 years, so you see, I can't let you go breaking more of her chains. Your part is done, Sunless. Leave the rest to me. I will conquer this nightmare for both of us. Well, and reap the reward, of course." Sonny bared his fangs. "She might not be as powerful as she had been before Sun God put her in chains, but she is still a creature of divine rank. Your power alone will not be enough to wound her, let alone kill her. You are insane. Hope's poison must have gotten to you." Mordred smiled. "Ah, you are correct. I am not powerful enough to kill her alone. That is why I have spent months carefully putting a few useful ideas into the Ivory Lord's muddled mind. I needed Noctis to give him a little push, though. Kill his brother, destroy his city. You did well to assist him." A dangerous gleam appeared in the old man's eyes. "Now that Sevras has nothing left, he will direct his endless ire on Hope. That will be my chance. So, Sunless, I would advise you to stand down. If you truly know your limits, you won't stand in my way." Sonny stared at Mordred for a few moments, his eyes growing darker and darker. A tense silence settled between the two of them. Then a swirl of sparks appeared around the devil's hand. The old man looked at it, his gaze growing sharp and cold. He was waiting to see what weapon Sonny was going to summon. However, Sonny did not summon a weapon. Instead, an exquisite wooden chair appeared in his hand. Glaring at Mordred, Sonny put the chair on the ground, sat on it, and crossed his arms. "Well, go on then. What are you waiting for? I wish you luck." Chapter 735. Settling debts. Sonny sat comfortably on the elegant wooden chair, staring at Mordred with all four of his arms crossed. The chair was a bit small for his prodigious body, but due to the quality and durability of the materials it was made of, managed to carry the weight rather well. Noctis really knew the value of good craftsmanship. The old man, meanwhile, met his deadpan gaze with a mildly surprised expression slowly appearing on his face. All around them, the ivory city was being devoured by fire. After a while, Mordred shifted a little and then said with amusement, "To be honest, I expected you to attack me." Sonny scoffed. "Why would I bother? You seem to be hellbent on committing suicide. I can just wait until hope kills you, then carry on with my initial plans." He thought for a bit and then added, "Plus, in the improbable case that you somehow succeed, I don't really lose anything. I will still become a master. Sure, the great and mighty clan Valor might suffer as the result, but what do I care? I have no relationship with them." The old man glanced at him with a pleasant smile. "That bow of yours suggests otherwise." Sonny chuckled. "My warbow, do you like it?" "Well, I like it very much. What a beauty. Your family really knows how to craft a memory. However, you are mistaken if you think that I received it for rendering some service to Valor or being close to your father. In fact, they don't even know that I have it. I would prefer if it stayed that way, too." Mordred tilted his head a little. "Have no worry, Sunless. Your secret is safe with me. All your secrets, actually. I have to admit, though, with how paranoid you are, I thought that you would try to silence me at all costs. Aren't you afraid that I will reveal them after escaping from the nightmare?" Sonny smiled lazily, then shrugged. "Not really." He sighed and then said in a serious tone, "While it pains me that you know so much about me, you and I are similar in many ways. We both believe that knowledge is the origin of power, don't we? So, sharing my secrets would be no different from giving your power away. Why share the leverage you have on me with anyone when you can have it all to yourself?" Sonny's expression grew a little dour. "Of course, I would gladly kill you to destroy that leverage. However, the benefit of destroying you is not worth the risk of fighting you. You are one scary bastard, Mordred, you know that. Plus, I don't even know how to kill you, so what's the point?" He was not lying. Although Sonny had grown more powerful than he had expected inside the nightmare, Mordred was much older and had vastly more experience. He also had a far greater background. If Sonny's suspicions were correct, not only had the Prince of Nothing inherited the lineage of War God, but he had also been raised by both great clan Valor and Asterion. He was a monster created by not one but two sovereigns. A monster capable enough to, maybe, outshine both of them. How could an outskirt rat like Sonny compete with that upbringing? He couldn't, yet. At least not in a direct fight. A competition of wit, on the other hand. Who could say which one of them was more devious? As Sonny stared at him with a smile, Mordred remained silent for a few moments and then slowly stood up. "What remarkable restraint. Are you sure you don't want to attack me, Sunless?" Sonny shook his head. "I really don't want to." The old man looked at him, then said with uncertainty, "Well, I'll be going then." He lingered for a few moments before turning around and taking a step away. Sonny cleared his throat. "There is one problem, though." Mordred froze, then faced him again, an amused smile appearing on his lips. His eyes glistened dangerously. "Oh," Sonny sighed. "As much as I don't want to fight you, and as much as I wish you luck in ending this nightmare, I am a very, very petty person. I also have a great memory. I tend to remember my grudges." He raised a hand and started counting on his fingers. "You used me, lured me into a trap, put me in hot water with clan valor, caused me and my friend weeks of terrible suffering, almost cost us our lives, and then even tried to kill me yourself. You really, really owe me a lot, Mordred, don't you think?" The old man grinned. "Ah, I see how you could have been a little upset with my actions. Well, how do you suppose we should settle my debt, Sunless?" Sonny made himself more comfortable and smiled. Then he said in a cheerful tone, "I accept transcendent memories. 6 or 7 should do." Mordred stared at him for a bit, then laughed. "I see. Sadly, that would not be very convenient for me. Anything else you might consider?" Sonny looked at him with regret. "Well, in that case, there is one other thing. I guess I can just prevent you from killing Hope, ruin the plans you've been making for the better part of the decade, torture you ruthlessly for a few weeks, and then slowly destroy your body. That should make us even, I think." Mordred looked at him with a somber expression. "I thought you couldn't lie. Didn't you say that you wouldn't attack me?" Sonny shook his head. "I said that I don't want to attack you, never said that I won't." The old man sighed. "Yes, I noticed. Pity. I hope to avoid this." With that, the shadows around Sonny suddenly shifted and moved. A moment later, 5 identical 4-armed devils rose from them, each at least 3 meters tall. They wore fearsome onyx armors with darkness veiling their bestial faces and black eyes. Each had 4 horns, and each had one of them broken. The devils radiated a suffocating, frightening feeling of malice and furious power. Still sitting on his chair, Sonny stared at the 5 shadow spawns that surrounded him with trepidation. His face grew still. Gripping the extraordinary rock, he shivered and said glumly, "Well, that's not good at all." Chapter 736. Surrounded 5 reflections surrounded Sonny, each bearing his own image. The towering shadowkin devils looked nothing short of terrifying. Their gaunt, ironclad figures emanated a feeling of profound threat and malice, and their black eyes peered at him with inhuman intensity. It was deeply disturbing. "Damn, am I that scary?" Sonny leaned on the backrest of his chair and said without skipping a pause, "Lost from light, kill that wicked old man." The reflections continued to stare at him unmoving. A few moments passed, but nothing happened. An awkward silence hung in the air. Mordred chuckled. "You didn't really think that this trick would work again, did you?" He smiled, then glanced at the shadow devils with satisfaction. "Naturally, I bound them to myself before you arrived." Sonny glared at the old man for a bit, then looked away and shrugged. "Well, it was worth a try anyway." "Disappointing." He studied the reflections for a second, trying to determine how powerful they were. Exactly. Unlike how Mordred had appeared during their soul battle, now, Sonny could only see one weak core in the frail body of the old man. It was dim and unremarkable, hinting that he was looking at the priest's own soul, or at least its perfect imitation. It seemed that determining which body the Prince of Nothing possessed in that manner was impossible. His own soul was perfectly hidden. The reflections, on the other hand, were different and quite bizarre. Sonny could see shadow cores inside each of the creatures, but despite looking like shadow devils, none of them were. All of them were ascended, but 2 out of 5 were mere beasts. 2 more were monsters, and 1 was a demon. Sonny had no idea how the class progression worked when it came to reflections, but he suspected that they were less powerful than the mirror beast, their elder sibling, had been. Mirror Beast had lived a much longer life and risen to an ascended devil, after all. Still, 5 ascended reflections were most likely more than enough to rip him to shreds, especially considering that each of them was reflecting a wielder of a divine aspect. Sonny looked at Mordred, hesitated, and said somberly, "Very impressive, but also a bit underwhelming. I guess slaughtering thousands of mundane humans was not very nourishing for your monsters, huh?" Now that I see them, I do agree that your accomplishments in the north might have been silly. The old man looked at him with a dark expression. There's still enough to kill you, Sonny grinned. Oh, let's not, you are not going to kill me. Mordred raised an eyebrow. What makes you say that? Sitting comfortably on his chair, Sonny shrugged. What's the point? I am more useful to you alive. Plus, if you get rid of me, you can say goodbye to all the wonderful memories I possess. I would have been a bit scared if you had weeks to torture me into surrendering them, but you don't. The old man smiled. This is a very reasonable answer. However, are you that sure I am a reasonable man, Sunless? Sonny felt a cold shiver run down his spine and forced out a weak smile. Ah, no, not really. I am not sure. In any case, you are also underestimating me. Mordred frowned. How so? Your allies seem to have abandoned you. Your shadows are wounded and can't be summoned again. What can you do against reflections? Glancing at the towering shadow devils with apprehension, Sonny lingered for a few moments and then said, Well, if you put it like that, it does seem like I can't do much. They are all very powerful indeed. I am already a bit of a menace, and these things possess all of my powers, wielding them with the might of Ascendids no less. However, he shifted his gaze to the old man, a wicked smile appearing on his lips. The same can't be said about you, can it? You sacrificed all your cores to create these reflections. By now, you could have succeeded in creating one, maybe two. That still makes you weaker than me. More than that, I couldn't help to notice that your aspect, terrifying as it might be, doesn't offer you any direct combat augmentations. It's all pure utility. So, while I can't kill your monsters, his eyes grew darker, suffused with a dangerous glow. I probably stand a good chance of destroying your body before they can stop me. His four shadows were wrapped around his body, filling it with explosive might. There were just a few meters separating him from the frail old man. He could breach that distance in an instant. Mordred opened his eyes wide, took a shaky step back, and raised his hands to protect himself. Oh no, please don't. What would I do without a body? Then he shook his head and laughed. It's not like there's a whole city full of people I can take, right? Come to think of it. Maybe I'll travel outside the city, find one of your allies, and wear them instead. Which one should I pick, huh? The child or the cripple? I can kill two birds with one stone and deal with that infuriating oracle of yours at the same time. That is a great idea, don't you think? Sonny grew quiet. No, I don't think that it's a great idea. The old man looked at him darkly, then shook his head and turned around. I suggest that you don't move, Sunless. My reflections won't kill you, but that doesn't mean that they will be gentle. Pain is pain. With that, he started climbing the steps leading to the bridge. Sonny stared at his back, gritting his teeth, then summoned the dying wish. As soon as the charm weaved itself and merged with the mantle of the underworld, he sent all four of his shadows to wrap themselves around the onyx armor, thus augmenting its underworld armament enchantment 4 times over. Already strengthened by it, the effect of the dying wish became tremendously enhanced. Memory enchantments, death wish. Enchantment description. Those who witness the wielder of this memory are compelled, friends to be inspired, foes to seek the wielder out. Already a few steps away, Mordred suddenly slowed down, swayed a little, and then turned around. His face was tense and full of fury. Arg, what? He stared at Sonny with madness and bloodlust in his eyes, then grimaced. What a vile memory. Nice trick, Sunless, but it won't work on me. The old man smiled, then disdain, then suddenly froze. Slowly, a deep scowl appeared on his face. But why would you want me to attack, Sunless? That doesn't make any sense. You know how dangerous I am. Unless, of course, his eyes widened. At the same time, Sonny grinned. And far away from them, across the vast expanse of emptiness leading to the Ivory Island, a small figure appeared from the darkness of the sky below, flying swiftly toward the bleeding dragon. Chapter 737. Self-reflection after Solvin and Sun Prince had been defeated, and the light of dawn washed over the shattered remains of the Kingdom of Hope. bringing with it the frenzied fury of the ivory dragon. Sonny knew that Severax would not be the only obstacle in their way. Throughout all of it, he had never forgotten about Mordred. In truth, he was warier of the banished Prince of Valor than he was of the immortal saints, no matter how powerful and dreadful they were. The full force of a great clan had failed to contain the Prince of Nothing. So what hope did Sonny have? Of course, he was not sure that Mordred would end up as their adversary in this nightmare. They were allies during this hellish trial, after all, at least in theory, but he could not discount the possibility. The advice Master Jet had given Sonny before he ventured into the seed stuck with him. Most of the hard-won wisdom she had shared in the past ended up being instrumental to his survival, so he made sure to remember her words. For that reason, Sonny and Kai agreed on a very simple plan. One of them took the obsidian knife, and the other took the glass knife. Depending on which of the immortals fell, one man was going to finish the job, while the other was going to prevent the Prince of Nothing from intervening, in case the need to do so arose. As the saying went, it was unwise to put all your eggs in one basket. The type of egg Sonny had the most experience with had belonged to a great devil, so he was not quite sure why exactly keeping eggs in a basket was so detrimental. But he did agree with the general idea. And so, from the moment the frail old man appeared in his view, Sonny had pursued a single goal. He had to keep the attention of Mordred and all 5 of his reflections on himself. Even though there was a small possibility that he could emerge victorious if the 2 of them clashed in earnest, Sonny did not consider his chances of defeating the banished prince in battle high, especially not while being exhausted after the furious assault on the flying fleet and devoid of the support of his shadows. He had never intended to actually fight the Mordred. All he wanted to do was to stall him. For that reason, Sonny engaged Mordred in a lengthy conversation, created the false perception that he was still in possession of the glass knife by asking a few misleading questions, and provoked his opponent into revealing the 5 reflections. Perhaps the Prince of Nothing was poisoned by hope enough to lose a small part of his cunning, or perhaps he fell for the trap that awaited most habitual liars and failed to account for how warped his impression of people was. Perhaps he underestimated how proficient Sonny grew in utilizing his flaw for his own benefit. In any case, for once, Mordred ended up as the one being manipulated instead of the one pulling the strings. Sonny might have not been stronger than him, but he did manage to outwit the banished prince. Today, he turned out to be the more devious of the 2, even if just barely. He won the fight without lifting a finger, using only a wooden chair and his devilish tongue. Well, to be precise, he did not even use his tongue. He used a rock instead. As soon as all reflections revealed themselves, Kai started to move. And by the time he reached the Ivory Island, it was already too late to stop him. Almost. The Prince of Nothing still could have used his aspect to move through the reflections and invade the archer's soul. However, Kai was wearing the anvil amulet that Sonny had given him. This talisman had been forged by the Sovereign of Valor himself and made the wearer immune to Mordred's soul possession. Even if the banished prince jumped through the reflections into Kai's eyes, he was not going to be able to possess him. That left only the reflections, which were currently turned into copies of Sonny and wielded his divine aspect. Each had access to the memories he wore and his aspect abilities, including Shadow Step. They could still reach the island in time to prevent Kai from delivering the killing blow to Severax. Sonny had to stop them at all costs and buy his friend a few precious seconds, but that was easier said than done. As a small human figure streaked from the darkness of the sky below toward the slumped silhouette of the ivory dragon, Mordred swiftly turned and narrowed his eyes, instantly realizing that he had been played. Before he could react, however, a tide of shadows suddenly exploded from the small lantern hanging on Sonny's waist, enveloping everything around them in impenetrable darkness. The light of the sun was swiftly destroying the shadows, but at the same time, it was being devoured by the lantern, creating a strange equilibrium. The shadows themselves were ancient, deep, and resilient. Sunny had collected them from the dark sides of the islands surrounding the sanctuary before departing for the war. With no light remaining around them, there were also no reflections. With no reflections, Mordred was robbed of a large part of his power for a moment. That did not help at all against the 5 reflections, though, since each of them was as comfortable in the shadows as Sunny himself was. They were his perfect copies, after all, knowing that. Sunny decided to try a desperate gamble. The mantle of the underworld was still augmented by 4 shadows, its underworld armament, enchantment empowering the dying wishes effect manifold. Sunny himself was strongly affected by the compelling aura of the charm, feeling an almost irresistible urge to throw himself at the reflections and tear them apart. However, this sensation was swiftly disappearing, since he had already dismissed the iron statuette. Instead, he summoned the broken oath into the onyx armor, and since the 5 reflections were mirroring him, each of them reflected that change too. Only the demon turned out to be smart enough to stop himself and consider the consequences. The beasts and monsters failed to realize the result of their actions in time. Mordred moved, and so did the shadow devils. But just as they did, the vile charm fully weaved itself into existence. Augmented by the enchantment of the mantle of the underworld, its soul-eroding aura was strengthened and flowed outward like invisible poison. The armor, however, was itself augmented 4 times over by Sunny's shadows, making the empowering effect tremendously more pronounced. And on top of that, 4 out of the 5 reflections suddenly emanated the same ferocious aura. The 5 overcharged fields of soul erosion merged together, turning into something far more vicious and destructive than the sum of its parts, into something truly horrid. Even though the mantle of the underworld provided Sunny with a substantial degree of resistance against soul attacks, he couldn't help but let out a scream. The reflections opened their mouths in agony, too, although no sound came out of them. Mordred did not enjoy the same protection that Sunny and the reflections received from the onyx armor. Chapter 738, Soul Annihilation. The underworld armament allowed the mantle to accommodate and augment a charm memory, channeling its enchantment as if it was inherent to the armor itself. That alone made the mantle of the underworld incredibly flexible. What was more, this quality truly shined when wielded by Sunny. He could have augmented the broken oath with his 4 shadows, but chose to wrap them around his armor instead, achieving an even better result. Not only was the effect of the augmentation shared and enhanced, but all the other enchantments of the mantle of the underworld were augmented as well. Among them was Stalwart, which granted him extremely high protection against physical attacks, high protection against elemental attacks, and most importantly, a moderate amount of protection against mind and soul attacks. Currently, the mantle was simultaneously radiating a tremendously damaging soul annihilation aura and providing him with vastly increased resistance to soul damage. Even then, when 5 of these auras clashed and combined together, he let out a scream and collapsed to the ground, consumed by harrowing agony. His already wounded soul was being frayed and eroded at a terrible rate, and all he could do was writhe on the ground, barely clinging to any resemblance of consciousness. The 5 reflections were not doing much better. Even though their ascended souls, or whatever it was they had instead of souls, possessed a far better quality due to a superior rank, they had fewer cores. While that was not enough to make them succumb to soul annihilation faster than Sunny by itself, that also meant that they had fewer shadows, and therefore their reflected versions of the mantle enjoyed less augmentation, providing them with less resistance to soul damage. What it all meant, Sonny had no idea. He could not guess who was going to be destroyed first, the reflections or him. As far as he could tell, their chances were about equal. However, things were very different when it came to Mordred. Unlike Sonny and the reflections, he did not enjoy the protection of the mantle of the underworld. He was also only able to steal the aspect of the body he possessed, while his own strange and terrible ability to mirror someone's powers only worked inside the victim's soul. He could not simply copy the onyx armor onto himself, nor could he augment it. For the moment, Mordred was defenseless. With a startled yelp, the old man awkwardly fell to his knees and then rolled down the steps, ending up on the ground not too far away from Sonny. A stifled howl escaped from his lips, and his eyes opened wide, full of shock and terrible pain. The suffering Sonny and the reflections experienced affected him so much worse. Any other awakened would have been swiftly destroyed, but the Prince of Nothing persisted somehow. Several swirls of sparks instantly appeared around his body, heralding the appearance of protective memories. Who knew how vast and powerful his soul arsenal was? Mordred could have possessed a memory capable of turning the tide of events completely, but very few memories were capable of manifesting themselves instantly. Most took several precious seconds to appear, and usually the more powerful ones took the longest. By the time the sparks of light turned into tangible objects, he could have been either already dead or too severely damaged to be able to act. Writhing in agony, Sonny threw a burning look at the old man and gritted his teeth so hard that his fangs pierced his lip, sending drops of blood rolling down. "Die! Die, you bastard! Just hurry up and die!" A desperate hope that Mordred would fail to survive the soul annihilation filled his heart, despite the fact that Sonny did not really think that getting rid of the prince would be so easy. He seriously doubted that Mordred would allow himself to be killed in this fashion, not to mention that as far as he knew, the Prince of Nothing was as immortal as the cursed transcendence of the Kingdom of Hope. Both his physical and spirit bodies had been destroyed in the past, but that did not stop Mordred from continuing to exist somehow. The great clan Valor certainly did not lack means of dealing soul damage, but they had failed to get rid of his reflection. "I don't care. Just die." Sonny would have been satisfied with just destroying Mordred's mortal shell anyway. His true task was to buy Kai enough time to kill the ivory dragon, and forcing the prince to search for another body would do just that. Sadly, Mordred had the same idea. If he had lost all reason because of the pain, things could have turned differently, but the Prince of Nothing was nothing if not cool-headed and calculating. Despite the terrible suffering of having his soul slowly torn to pieces, he kept some of his composure and ability to think intact. Twisting, Mordred struggled to raise his head and looked in the direction of one of the reflections. The shadow spawn was on his knees, his bestial face contorted by a grimace of agony. The Prince of Nothing paled and then whispered something. A moment later, the figure of the kneeling devil rippled and shattered like a piece of glass. Something swift and intangible moved through the air and entered Mordred's body. Then another reflection shattered, and then another, and then another. In an instant, 4 of the 5 both beasts and both monsters were gone, leaving a lone demon behind. As they disappeared, the components of the soul-annihilating field disappeared as well. Only Sonny's own augmented aura was left to spread the invisible poison. He let out a trembling sigh of relief, and then dismissed the broken oath entirely. Almost at the same time, a silver bracelet, a necklace made of strange black pearls, and a bone scepter appeared on Mordred's body and in his hand. Each of the memories, without a doubt, provided him with a degree of soul protection, but by now they were of no use. With his soul in shambles and barely keeping itself together, Sonny remained laying on the ground. He groaned and then threw a tired glance at his enemy. The flood of soul essence he was sending into the shadow lantern had run dry, and the sunlight finally prevailed, dismantling the dome of shadows that surrounded them. Mordred looked different somehow. The old man's body remained the same, but now a subtle sensation of immense, turbulent power emanated from it. As if Sonny was facing a titan instead of a man. No way could it be. Two monsters and two beasts, between the four of them they had shared 6 soul cores. Had Mordred not dismissed the reflections but actually absorbed them in order to strengthen his soul and survive the powerful attack? How did it even work? How could an awakened absorb ascended cores? Would they weaken, or would all that excess power rip his soul to shreds from the inside? Sonny did not know. All he knew was that he was utterly beaten and spent, and there was an ascended demon and an awakened titan in the guise of an old man in front of him, wrath burning in their eyes. But that did not matter, because at that moment an inhuman, pained cry rolled across the empty expanse of the empty void and reached their ears. It was the voice of the ivory dragon, Sevras, his dying breath. Chapter 739. Empty skies while Sonny and Mordred struggled to survive as their souls were being destroyed. A human figure emerged from the darkness of the sky below and shot into the sunlight, flying with incredible speed. It was a man with skin that looked like polished bark and a burned, disfigured face. His armor was battered and painted dull by dried blood, and the quiver attached to his belt was long empty. The man had been an officer of the Sun Legion once, but now he returned to kill its commander. His eyes were full of resolve. Months had passed since the terrible day when Kai and his most brave soldiers were chained to the white cliff on the Sacrifice Island and left there to be devoured by the ivory dragon. Who could have thought that he would be back to this cursed place so soon? Leaving the heat of the burning city behind, Kai had hidden himself under the island where his comrades were turned to ash by the dragon's flame, waited for Sonny to get the full attention of the Prince of Valor, and then dashed forward without looking back. He did not wish to see the white cliff and the soot-covered chains hanging from its surface ever again. Flying under the last bridge connecting the rest of the city to the Ivory Island, he avoided being noticed too soon, and then ascended into the sunlight. Behind him, a dome of shadows suddenly appeared at the entrance to the bridge, hiding his friend from sight. With his heart growing heavy, Kai soared above the emerald grass of the Ivory City and finally saw his goal. A magnificent dragon was laying on the ground, blood streaming from his mangled neck. His white scales were painted crimson and one of his wings was broken. But the great beast was still alive. He was still breathing. He was immortal after all, but not for long. In his hand, Kai held a knife made of ghostly glass. Inside the knife, the dragon's fate was sealed, placed there by a ruthless god. Was Kai breaking the will of the gods by delivering it back to its owner, or completing their design? He did not know and he did not care. All he cared about was killing the dragon. Kai had never been very strong or very brave or very smart. It took him a long time to grow a little. He was not a person of great conviction either. But if there was one thing he believed, it was that Severax had to die, and that his ghastly reign had to end. The beautiful city he ruled was just too vile. Gritting his teeth, Kai ignored the pain that had tormented him for months and lunged at the gargantuan form of the dragon. The glass knife glistened in his hand, but even terribly wounded, the immortal transcendent was still immensely powerful and deadly. How could a mere awakened ever hope to wound him? Before Kai could thrust the ghostly blade into the exposed flesh on the great beast's neck, Severax suddenly stirred. His eyelids flew up, revealing inhuman amber eyes. His maw opened slightly, wisps of smoke escaping it. The dragon moved his healthy wing, and a torrent of wind crashed into Kai, sending him spinning. The glass knife scratched uselessly against impenetrable scales, and he was thrown away. A moment later, a giant claw brushed across his chest. The young man dashed away in time to avoid being killed, but just this light touch was enough to rip his breastplate open and shatter a few of his ribs. With a groan, Kai fell on the soft grass. His speed was so great that his body slid for a few dozen meters, and by the time he rose shakily to his knees, the dragon was already looking at him, ready to attack. A hint of confusion surfaced from the ocean of madness hidden in his eyes. Sevras lingered for a moment, and then a low, tired, sonorous voice resounded from all around them. I know you," Kai gritted his teeth. His surprise attack had failed, he failed. Now that the Transcendent was aware of him, there was little chance of delivering the fateful strike. No matter how wounded and exhausted the Ivory Lord was, he would still be immeasurably faster, stronger, and more powerful than an awakened with a weak aspect. He would crush Kai in an instant. The immortal was not going to die. Hope was not going to escape. The nightmare was not going to end. His friends would not be saved. Kai might have been able to fly through the sky and see far and wide, but he was no dragon. The man with a disfigured face looked at the immortal beast towering in front of him. He shook slightly and then lowered his head. And then he lunged forward, sending bits of torn grass into the air. He was fast, incredibly fast, but Sevras was faster. The great beast twisted his neck, protecting the wound left on it by the fangs of the beast of twilight, and then opened his maw to crush the small human between his jaws. Perhaps Kai could have dodged, but he didn't. Instead, he accelerated even more and flew straight into the dragon's maw, which instantly closed, giant fangs striking against each other with a deafening sound. Just like that, the crippled man was gone. The dragon froze for a moment, stunned by the little human's unflinching bravery. Then he suddenly shuddered and let out a tortured cry. Kai, who had plunged the glass knife into the soft flesh of the great beast's tongue, was thrown back and crashed heavily onto the ground. His bark-like skin was smoldering, scorched once again by the heat of the dragon's flame. His armor was disintegrating, and the Ivory Lord, meanwhile, was becoming mortal again. Now that his fate had been returned to him, the terrible wound on his neck was sapping him of life. A few seconds more and it was going to kill him. But no, not yet. As a long, sorrowful cry of the great beast echoed across the burning city, Sevras stubbornly refused to die. Straining his battered body, he slowly crawled forward, desperately trying to reach the ivory tower, which he had sworn to protect. Leaving a trail of blood behind, the beautiful white dragon tortuously wrapped his body around the great pagoda and tiredly lowered his head to the ground in front of its gates. His eyes slowly closed. It was his duty to protect it. He was going to it even in death. He promised, laying on the soft grass in the middle of a burning inferno. The dragon let out a soft breath. He imagined a different picture, a picture of a beautiful white city, its streets bathing in gentle sunlight, full of happy and kind people, thriving, peaceful, and safe. A few moments later, Sevras, the blessed of the sun, was dead. Chapter 740. Dream is collapsing. As the ivory dragon died, an invisible ripple spread through the world. The whole city trembled slightly, and then one of the two remaining chains that bound the ivory island to the rest of Hope's shattered kingdom broke with a deafening ring. The broken chain fell into the darkness of the sky below, leaving only a single tether holding the island in place. The island's position shifted. Not by much, but enough to cause the arching stone bridge to crack, shudder, and then slowly crumble. A cloud of stone dust rose into the air as the massive structure collapsed, enveloping the patch of grass where Sunny and Mordred lay, still reeling from the deadly soul attack. Sunny coughed and waved his hand in front of his face, weakly trying to chase the dust away. Damnation! The Prince of Nothing, meanwhile, was slowly rising to his feet. With a stagger, he regained his footing and looked in the direction of the ivory tower, his old face growing dim. Mordred remained silent for a while and then said evenly, "Well, that is a bit unfortunate." Sonny let out a hoarse laugh, causing the old man to turn around and glance at him darkly. Then he tried to sit up but failed. The Prince of Nothing scoffed. "Drop the act, Sunless. I know you are not that weakened." Sonny cursed, then stopped pretending and sat up with a groan. He was indeed in a very bad shape, drained of essence and barely alive because of how severely damaged his soul was. However, he was indeed not as weak as he had wanted to mislead Mordred into believing. The old man shook his head, then smiled. "Using my own reflections against me, how clever. I expected something like that from you." Then his face abruptly grew dark, and he gazed in the direction of the ivory tower once again. His voice sounded quiet and uncertain. "That, however, that I did not expect at all. It should not have been possible. I don't understand. Giving one of the knives away is not in your nature. With how cynical and distrustful you are, you should have clung to them to the end. How did I make this mistake?" Sonny grinned. "I guess I've changed." Mordred frowned, then slowly shook his head. "People don't change that easily." The grin on Sonny's face became a little brittle. "It wasn't easy." The old man remained motionless for a while, then sighed heavily and turned around to face him. At the same time, his remaining reflection did the same. The Prince of Nothing stared at the battered shadow devil for a few moments, then said amiably, "Sunless, my friend, please give me one reason why I shouldn't kill you." Sonny blinked a couple of times, then answered with a dark smile. "In case you didn't notice, people who try to kill me tend to end up dead instead." Mordred grinned dangerously. "I am sure I can manage." "Well, crap, I'm a bit sure myself." He tilted his head, then said doubtfully, "Because I still have the divine memory you want to get your hands on." The old man took a step forward, causing the reflection to do the same. "Normally that would have been a good reason, but right now, to be honest, Sunless, I am starting to wonder if it's worth the effort." Sonny lingered for a bit, then raised an eyebrow. "Pretty please," the Prince of Nothing laughed. "Not good enough." Sonny stared at him, slowly circulating what little essence he had left through his body. His shadows were damaged and restoring themselves in the nurturing black flames of his soul. His strength was depleted, his allies were far away and in even worse shape than him. Things were looking bleak. He sighed and then said in a neutral tone, "Look, sure, you can probably kill me, but make no mistake, I won't make it easy for you. More importantly, I'll make sure to resist for a long, long time." Mordred smiled politely. "So far, I am liking everything that I am hearing." Sonny grinned. "Aren't you forgetting something?" The Prince of Nothing lingered for a moment, then frowned. "And what might that be?" Climbing back onto his chair, Sonny leaned on the backrest and let out a relieved sigh. Then he pointed at the ivory tower. "This nightmare is coming to the end. There's not much time left until we are returned to the real world. Precious time that you are going to waste trying to get rid of me." Mordred looked at him with a dark expression. "That is all right. My schedule is suddenly free anyway. What else is there to do?" Sonny shook his head. "You might have lost the opportunity to kill the demon of desire, but have you forgotten about the demon of destiny? There is a whole ebony tower beneath us, free for the plunder." The old man's frown deepened. "The divine flames are much more intense and plentiful during this time. The rift in them can't be traversed by the likes of us. Not that there's enough time to anyway. Unless—" His expression suddenly changed. Sonny nodded. "Indeed. The sky below cannot be traversed, but we just happen to be near the Ivory Island and the portal that stands behind the tower. Now, you can waste time trying to kill me, or you can try to pour enough divine flame into it and get your hands on all the toys left behind by Nether. Just don't be an idiot like me and let the time catch up to them after the seal is broken." Mordred stared at him for a few moments and then grinned. "You are just hoping that the strange rot inside the ebony tower is going to devour me, aren't you? After all, it is not as starved yet in this time." Sonny coughed. Guilty as charged, still. Are you planning to kill a sovereign without taking a risk from time to time? Hurry up and decide. The clock is ticking." The old man studied him for a while, not saying anything. Gradually, Sonny grew extremely uncomfortable under that gaze. "Damned bastard, your desire to kill me can't be stronger than your desire to take revenge on Clan Valor. Hope, do your thing, come on." Eventually, Mordred chuckled, shook his head, and said, "Two sovereigns." Sonny raised an eyebrow. "What?" The old man turned around and headed to the edge of the island, followed by his reflection. "Two sovereigns. I plan to kill Asterion too. Although that will probably be much, much harder than dealing with my father. Still, I am as good at remembering grudges as you are, Sunless, so pray that we never meet again." He stopped near the very edge of the empty abyss of the sky below, lingered at it for a few moments, and then said somberly, "Although who will hear your prayers? The gods are dead." With that, the Prince of Nothing stepped into the darkness and disappeared, taking his reflection with him. Sonny was left alone on the empty island, struggling to believe that he actually survived. He looked down at his exquisite wooden chair, then at the rock in his hand. Then he let out a shaky breath. "Damn, I can't believe that worked." Chapter 741, Chain Breaker. For a few moments, Sonny remained motionless, staring at the beautiful ivory walls of the great pagoda that towered above the world. Although the whole city was being consumed by immolating flame, here at its precipice, everything was calm and quiet. He couldn't quite believe it. Solving, the Saint of War, was dead. The immortal prince encased in the mountain of moving steel was dead. The noble dragon that had dutifully guarded the tower was dead as well. They won. The nightmare was conquered, more or less. From the blood-soaked arena of the Red Colosseum to the never-ending prison of nightmares, to the numinous temple of the Chalice, to the furious battle for the sky above the Ivory City, to confronting the Prince of Nothing, somehow he had lived through all of it and triumphed. What were the chances of that? Just 5 months. But it felt like a lifetime. Of course, there were a few issues left. Most of the army of the perished Chain Lords was still intact and on its way to the city. The cohort had dealt a terrible blow to the small part of it, but hundreds upon hundreds of flying ships still remained, carrying thousands upon thousands of soldiers. Now that their commanders were dead, he was not sure what would happen to them and how they would react. Noctis was nowhere to be found. And hope was still chained, even if not for long now. With a sigh, Sonny stood up and grimaced as a feeling of sickening weakness overwhelmed him. His soul was terribly damaged. He had never abused it to this degree before, not even during the siege of the Crimson Spire. His body was not doing too great either. Sonny had given his all to come this far, and now he was at the end of his rope. But he was also so close to becoming a master. Slowly walking to the edge of the island, he looked into the darkness of the sky below for a few moments, summoned the Dark Wing, and then glided down to the last remaining chain holding the ivory island in place. There was not enough essence left in his soul to turn into a swift shadow, and he was too tired to run. So Sonny simply walked forward, using his enchanted cloak to scale the uneven links of the heavenly chain from time to time. It took him a while to traverse the wide chasm of emptiness and climb to the surface of the familiar tranquil island. The emerald meadow, the calm surface of a clear lake, the peaceful grove of ancient trees. He had been here before, in the distant future. Of course now, the island did not look exactly the same. There were pools of dragon blood sizzling in the green grass, and wisps of smoke floating in the air, brought over from the burning city by the wind. He looked at the ivory tower and saw the body of a beautiful white dragon wrapped around it, not yet reduced to weathered bones. Sonny remained motionless for a bit and then went to find Kai. The young man was laying on the grass not too far away, unconscious. His armor had melted and disintegrated, and his bark-like skin seemed damaged and scorched. Many of his bones were broken, and his disfigured face was contorted by a grimace of pain. But he was alive. After checking on his friend, Sonny came to the conclusion that Kai's life was not in danger. His wounds, while serious, were not enough to kill an awakened. At least not in a short time. Not knowing what else to do, Sonny summoned the puppeteer's shroud, rolled it, and placed the soft fabric under the archer's head as a pillow. Then he lingered for a few moments, patted Kai on the shoulder, and stood up. Then he slowly walked forward and stood in front of the dead dragon's head, looking at the closed gates behind it. This was it, the prison of hope. As he studied the gates, something suddenly rustled behind him. Sonny remained motionless for a few moments and then slowly turned around. His eyes were dark and hollow. Noctis did not look as bad as he had after the battle with Solving, but he also did not look good. The sorcerer was battered and beaten, his body covered by terrible burns. His elegant garments had turned into rags, and his raven-black hair was singed and uneven. He also looked different. It was as though the burden of madness that had clouded his beautiful gray eyes finally disappeared, leaving them sparkling and clear. The sorcerer looked radiant and at ease, emanating a cool and calming aura. His friendly presence enveloped Sonny like an embrace. Perhaps this was how he had been centuries ago, before the duty of being a shackle to desire turned him twisted and weighed down by the curse of eternal servitude. Noctis glanced up at the ivory expanse of the great pagoda and then looked at Sonny with a smile. "Ah, Sunless, please excuse my disheveled appearance. Looks like we've won, doesn't it?" Sonny lingered for a few moments, then offered him a silent nod. After that he faced the sorcerer and asked, "So, what now? This is it. We are done." Noctis remained silent for a bit, then lightly shook his head. "Well, actually, there is one small thing left to do." A crooked smile appeared on Sonny's face, and he looked away, hiding his eyes from the sorcerer. His voice resounded from the extraordinary rock, tinged with a bitter emotion. "I thought you said that she can break one chain on her own." Noctis smiled. "Oh, I think that she can. However," the immortal's smile paled and then disappeared, leaving his face strangely bare. "That doesn't mean that she should." He sighed and then looked away at the pillars of smoke rising above the dying city. His gaze was distant and solemn. "Have you ever seen a wolf gnaw its paw off to escape a trap, Sunless? Ah, it's a terrible thing to behold. I wouldn't wish such a fate on anyone." Noctis remained silent for a while and then added in a wistful tone, "Wolves are meant to be free." Then a carefree smile appeared on his beautiful face once again, and the sorcerer turned to Sonny with sparks dancing in his gray eyes. "So, my friend, the time has finally come for me to request something of you." He reached out with his hand and opened his palm. Sonny remained silent, refusing to look in the sorcerer's direction. "Will you give me the obsidian knife?" "Got it." Sonny wanted to say so much. He wanted to do so much. He felt so much. But he knew that it would have been a wrong and cruel thing to do. A betrayal. He sighed heavily and then faced Noctis. A swirl of sparks appeared around his hand. "I have never seen a real wolf, you know. And yes, I will, since you asked nicely." He opened the lid of the covetous coffer, rummaged inside, and then placed the knife cut from a single piece of obsidian in the sorcerer's hand. Noctis received it and then calmly looked at the black blade. His fingers slowly closed around the handle. A sad smile appeared on his face. "Well then, I guess this is a goodbye. Farewell, Sunless, you have been a great friend to me, and I hope that I have been a good friend to you too." He sighed, lingered for a few moments, and then added, "Before we part, however, I must tell you something." Sonny looked at him darkly and asked in a hoarse voice, "What?" Noctis silently shook his head. You really should stop wearing all black. What a terribly drab color. Ah, Sunless, you are better than this." With that, the sorcerer laughed and took a step forward. He hesitated for a second, then locked Sonny in a hug. Because of the difference in their heights, Sonny had to bend down a little. Noctis chuckled, then grew silent for a moment. Then he sighed and whispered, his voice suddenly low and somber. Just 4 words, each carrying immeasurable weight. "Never trust the gods." Then the sorcerer let go of Sonny, smiled one last time, and walked away. Soon he disappeared from sight. And not too long after that, the ivory island trembled slightly as the last chain holding it in place broke apart. Sonny gritted his teeth, then looked away and wiped his eyes. His shoulders fell. Damn scoundrel, you tricked me again. Chapter 742. Hope Sonny stood motionless for a while, feeling the ground move beneath him. Now that all 7 of the chains were broken and the ivory tower became completely untethered from the rest of the Kingdom of Hope, it started to ascend. Slowly at first, and then faster and faster, the island it stood upon soared into the sky, leaving the shattered land behind. And as it did, Sonny felt the nightmare coming to the end. Slowly, he walked to the edge and looked down at the burning city below. The beautiful buildings of white stone were melting. The aerial bridges and elegant aqueducts were collapsing, unable to withstand the terrible heat. The streams of clear water were turning into scalding steam. All around, he could see nothing but an ocean of flame. The wind brought with it the distant sound of human cries, smoke, and the smell of burning flesh. Thousands of people, those who still lived, were drowning in the fiery ocean, turning into piles of blackened bones and ash. The ivory city was dying. Was this what salvation looked like? In the thousands of years to come, the scorched islands were going to crumble into the sky below one after another, forming the tier. The twisted rock would eventually be the last one to fall. As the ivory tower rose higher and higher, the sight of the dying city did not encompass all of Sonny's vision anymore. Now, he saw further and wider. The landscape of the Kingdom of Hope was laid bare in front of him. He saw the shape of a giant steel corpse swinging below a faraway island on a broken chain, and a shape of a shattered ship laying on the ground. Effie and Cassie were somewhere there as well. But the distance was too great for Sonny to see them. He saw countless islands, some of them verdant and green, some of them gray and desolate. There were forests and lakes, rivers and hills, human settlements, small and large. He saw people, cattle, beasts, and nightmare creatures. He saw the chains stretching into the distance as they connected the islands together. Looking up from the ground, Sonny saw numerous flying ships rushing toward the burning city. There were hundreds and hundreds of them, some with white sails, some with red. The army of the fallen chain lords had arrived. As the ivory island rose even higher, the sky around it started to change. The change was subtle at the beginning, but as the ivory tower continued to ascend, it became more and more pronounced. The invisible power that held the flying islands above the abyss of the sky below was shifting. As its heart climbed higher and higher, it was slowly becoming more and more overbearing. The giant enchantment was losing its balance. Sonny shivered as he realized what was happening. The crushing was coming to the chained isles for the first time. As he watched, it descended upon the shattered remains of the Kingdom of Hope in all its vicious might. Across numerous islands, dust suddenly rose into the air. Ancient forests were flattened in an instant. Tall hills broke apart, rivers boiled and changed their course, settlements were turned into ruins. Countless humans, beasts, and nightmare creatures were cruelly killed, not knowing what had killed them. The flying ships were hit the hardest, every one of them instantly turning into a cloud of splinters, debris, and broken bodies. The mighty army was gone in a second. The scale of the destruction was too large to comprehend. Sonny watched as the Kingdom of Hope was turned into the chained isles, paralyzed by the inconceivable horror of that sight. For a while, all thoughts disappeared from his head. Then suddenly his eyes widened. Cassie, Effie. For a moment he was consumed by fear, but then his heart slowly calmed. No, they were all right. Cassie had always been good at predicting when the islands would enter the crushing back in the future. She would have warned Effie if they were in danger and taken them both to safety. Sonny sighed with relief. Now that his paralysis was broken, however, another thought suddenly entered his mind. He took an uncertain step back from the edge, then turned around and ran to the center of the island. Approaching the dead dragon, he hurriedly climbed over the beast's massive head and jumped down, landing near the gates of the ivory tower. The ancient doors were closed shut, as if no one had opened them in 1,000 years. Sonny gritted his teeth and pulled, putting the strength of all his shadows into it. Hope, he had to see hope. Succumbing to the pressure, the gates slowly moved. Tortuously slowly, one side of them slid forward, creating an opening. Not wasting any more time, he pushed himself into the narrow gap and entered the ivory tower. Soon, he saw the familiar great hall, its vast expanse bathed in light that streamed through tall windows. 7 chains sprawled from the pristine white floor, as if growing out of it, each ending in a broken shackle. The shackles were bleak and marred, their metal torn. There was fresh blood on the broken shackles, suffused with a radiant golden glow. And between them, Sonny staggered and involuntarily fell to his knees. Every passion, every desire, every emotion dwelling in his heart suddenly surged forward and ignited, breaking out of control. In the center of the great hall, surrounded by a swirling hurricane of light and darkness, a vague and graceful silhouette towered above the broken chains. He couldn't quite tell where the light ended and where her numinous body began. Perhaps Hope had no body at all and was instead made of pure radiance, pure darkness. He felt as if her nebulous visage was almost human-like but also inexplicably alien. The shapes and contours were both correct and wrong, both familiar and strange, both pleasing and revolting, and beautiful. So beautiful, she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. She was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. She was divine, unholy, unknown, unknowable. A demon, and she was leaving. Sonny couldn't see much, but he clearly understood that Hope was ready to disappear. Maybe she was already half gone, and all he saw was an afterimage. And yet he had to, his mind was scattered and empty, and he didn't quite remember what he wanted to do. What he desired. Sonny gritted his teeth and then screamed, letting his desire dictate the question. Wait, don't go, tell me why the Lord of Light did this. Why did the gods imprison you? Why couldn't they just kill you? Why? The demon of desire paid him no attention. For a moment, Sonny thought that he would not receive an answer. But then something changed. Hope moved and was suddenly beside him. Her face, which was weaved of light and darkness, encompassed the whole world. Her radiant eyes peered into the deepest, most hidden parts of his soul. And then a voice that sounded like the rustle of countless leaves, like a myriad of prayers, like the wind that blew between the stars, whispered into his ear. Because we are their flaw. Sonny's eyes grew wide, and then everything became dark. The nightmare was over. Chapter 743, Appraisal. Your nightmare is over. Prepare for appraisal. Once again, Sonny found himself in the space between dream and reality. The boundless black void was illuminated by a myriad of stars, with countless strings of silver light connecting them together to form an infinite, beautiful pattern. Now that he had a nascent understanding of sorcery, Sonny saw the pattern differently. His old suspicions grew stronger, slowly turning into a certainty. This was the inner sanctum of the spell, and if the spell had been created by Weaver, then what he was looking at was its weave. The myriad of stars were the nexuses. The strings of light, however, were not the same as the threads of essence he could create himself. Instead, the spell was weaved from the strings of fate itself. As that realization took root in his heart, Sonny shuddered. The scale of the cosmic weave of silver light and numerous stars that surrounded him had already been too vast to comprehend. Now that he glimpsed its true nature, it suddenly seemed even more inconceivable. Yes, Weaver was called the demon of fate, but harvesting its very fabric to create a titanic enchantment was too incredible, even for the firstborn of the unknown. For a demon, Sonny shivered once again. We are their flaw. What did she mean? Hope's answer had shaken him to the very core. The implications were too unthinkable. He did not truly understand what she had meant, but felt as though he was at the precipice of a vast and terrible truth. Sonny was still far away from grasping that truth, however. Were the demons personifications of the flaws that the gods had shed? Is that how the gods had become flawless? Or had the gods been flawless before the demons appeared instead? None of it made any sense. How did the unknown from whom the demons had come fit into this? Was there a hint at who or what the unknown had been or was? As always, there were too many questions and almost no answers. If there was one thing that became clear, however, it was that the relationship between the gods and the demons was even more complicated than he had thought. How infuriating! Sonny had learned a remarkable secret, but had no way to understand it. He stared into the distance for some time, then sighed. Well, whatever. I am too small and weak to concern myself with the secrets of the divine anyway. Although he was not as small and weak as he had been before, he was a master, or rather was about to become one. As if answering his thoughts, the spell finally spoke. Awakened. Your trial is over. Its voice continued to resonate in the black void. A lonesome shadow came to a land of shattered dreams. It was captured and thrown into a cage, but escaped by weaving sorceries from its own soul. The shadow beheaded itself to take the slave collar off its neck and lost its heart to win its freedom. Leaving the Colosseum behind, the shadow traveled far and got ensnared. It lived 100 lives and died 100 deaths within a dreadful nightmare, forgetting what it was and where it came from. The shadow did not break, and so the nightmare broke instead. Free once again, the shadow befriended a mad sorcerer, a feral child, a crippled archer, and a blind prophet. Together they collected the deaths of the immortal lords and waged a war against the holy city. The lords were killed, the city was destroyed. The shadow broke the chains of hope and set desire free. You have slain and awakened. The spell went on to list everyone and everything he had killed inside the nightmare. Sonny felt that something strange was happening to time inside the black void, because it did not take too long for the spell to finish with that part of the appraisal, and there was a lot for it to list. Sonny had been busy in these past 5 months after all. He had lost count at some point, but the number of his victims had to be somewhere between 1 and 2,000. He had slain 1,000 enemies at the Red Colosseum alone. A few of them stood out from the litany of names. The Red Priest Nightmare, the 3 War Maidens, a few high-ranking officers of the Flying Fleet, solving herself. That was the tally of his deeds. The spell was not shy about showering him with praise, too. Of course, his most dangerous battle had been the battle of wits against Mordred. After a while, the spell was ready to pass a verdict. You have set free a demoness chained by a god. Your achievements are remarkable. Final appraisal, excellent. With that, it grew silent. Sonny remained motionless for a few moments, then frowned. Wait, what? Excellent, just excellent. What the hell, spell? It did not even bother to add a remark after the appraisal. He had killed hundreds upon hundreds of awakened humans and nightmare creatures, including plenty of fallen abominations and masters. He had even killed a saint. He had learned true sorcery, won a battle against a whole army, caused the deaths of several immortals, and set free a demon against a god's will. He had his head cut off and his heart ripped out, and still lived to tell the tale. Was it not enough to earn a better mark? Not that it mattered anyway. Unlike the first nightmare, the second did not come with an additional boon. Sonny already had a true name and an aspect legacy. All he was going to receive was the Ascension, which was the only reward he truly cared about. But still, why was his performance in the first nightmare appraised as glorious, but his performance in the second nightmare as just excellent? Both achievements seemed equally improbable, but this one was without a doubt much more impressive. Suddenly, an idea entered his mind. Sonny's eyes widened. Can this be true? If it was, his heart suddenly skipped a bit. What was the difference between what he had done in his 2 nightmares? Yes, his deeds in the Kingdom of Hope were astonishing and bordering on impossible, but almost all of them repeated the events of the original past. They had followed the current of fate. The Temple of the Chalice had been destroyed. Sun Prince had lost his arm and ended up with his chest torn open, hanging from the Shipwreck Island with his leg tangled in a broken chain. Lord Sevras died, wrapping his dragon body around the ivory tower. The only substantial change he had achieved was killing Solving instead of letting her suffer for an eternity in the grasp of Wormvein. In the first nightmare, however, Sunny was not sure how the true temple slave fared, but he suspected that their paths diverged quite a lot. In other words, he had carved his own path through the Black Mountain, overcoming the current of fate to a much larger degree. But what did all of this mean? Sunny forgot to breathe. Was that what the spell truly valued? Was that what its true purpose was? Had Weaver created it to change fate? Chapter 744. Ascension. Sunny reeled from all the information he was receiving. He had already been exhausted after the battle against the Flying Armada, the race across the burning city, the confrontation with Mordred and the rest. Witnessing Hope in her true form and hearing her inhuman, beautiful voice had almost overloaded his mind. Looking at the spell through the prism of his new knowledge of sorcery had been another shock. And this latest revelation, Sunny groaned. What does it all mean? Of course, he could not be certain of the validity of his guess. But his intuition told him that he was at least partially right. The appraisal of the challengers' performance did not depend on the greatness of the feats they had achieved, but instead on how far they had strayed from the predestined outcome, how well they had resisted the current of fate. The spell wanted humans to strain against the chains of fate, maybe even break them. But why? Why would the demon of fate want fate to be subjugated? By mere mortals, no less. And what was the point of manipulating fate inside illusory nightmares? No matter how much was changed, it was never going to affect the dream realm and the waking world. It was never going to reach reality. Whatever changes had been made, they were going to disappear forever as soon as the nightmare ended. As far as Sunny knew, no echo of the events that transpired in the first, second, and third nightmares had ever affected change in the real world. The only thing that returned from the nightmares were the awakened. He frowned, feeling a vague hint of suspicion appearing in his mind. However, before he could grasp it, the spell spoke again. Its voice resounded in the darkness, enveloping him from all directions. The third seal is broken. Awakening dormant powers. Sunny was about to ascend. Just as before, he felt as though something was waking up inside him. His 4 shadow cores ignited with intense heat, the power within them surging. The heat spread through his soul and his body, rejuvenating and changing them. The feeling was familiar and euphoric. He felt his body being reforged into a stronger, better, more perfect version of itself. His soul was going through the same sublime transformation. This process was already familiar to Sunny, since more or less the same thing had happened to him twice before. However, this time, something was different. Instead of stopping after reaching the threshold of qualitative change and immense fortification, the transformation continued. His body and soul both turned incandescent and malleable by the furious heat flowing through them, started to melt into each other. They were slowly merging. But they were not simply joining into a single whole. Instead, the two parts of his being resonated with each other, reinforcing one another. The power of that resonance grew stronger and stronger, and then exploded once it reached his 4 cores. Under the influence of the resonance, the threshold was demolished, pushing him even further on the path of evolution. And as his body and soul became one, a profound change took place. Suddenly, Sunny felt the shadow essence coursing through every fiber of his being with stark clarity. The difference was so staggering that he almost yelped. The measure of control he could exert on his essence became incredibly precise and fine. Additionally, since his body and soul were now deeply interconnected, the effect of one on another also went through a fundamental change. He could do much more and with much less. This was the true boon of the Ascension. And there was something else, a deep and vast shift in his very being that he could feel, but not understand or express with words yet. All Sonny knew was that it had to do with his relation to the waking world, the dream realm, and his connection to both. Slowly, the heat suffusing his newly reforged self subsided and turned into a pleasant coldness. The coldness then disappeared, absorbed into his spirit, his flesh, and his bones. Sonny looked at the black void with new eyes. He felt powerful. He felt as though there was furious might boiling under his skin. He also felt calm and confident, balanced. As he listened to his body, the spell spoke from the darkness, awakening aspect ability. Aspect ability acquired. Sonny held his breath. Aspect ability name, shadow manifestation. He clenched his fists. Is this what I think it is? However, to his surprise, the spell was not done speaking. Stunning Sonny, its voice resounded once again. Your attribute has evolved. Your aspect ability has evolved. The spell paused for a moment and then added solemnly, your ascension is complete. Sonny opened his eyes wide. What? What has evolved? He hurriedly summoned the runes and read them. Name, sunless. True name, lost from light. Rank, ascended. Class, devil. Shadow cores, 4/7. Shadow fragments, 744/4000. Sonny stared at the number of his fragments for a moment, then shook his head and skipped ahead to his attributes. Attributes, faded, flame of divinity. He had expected the flame of divinity to transform once again, but it was the same. Neither did blood weave and bone weave change. Instead, Child of Shadows was gone. A new attribute had replaced it. Sonny stared at the runes. They read, Master of Shadows. What? He sucked in a deep breath, waited for a moment, and then concentrated on the shimmering symbols. Master of Shadows, attribute description. Shadows recognize you as one of their champions. The first part was the same, but the second was new. Wait, does this mean that I command wild shadows now? He quickly concentrated on his abilities, looking for the one that had evolved. It was Shadow Control. Now its description read, Shadow Control Ability Description. Your shadows are more independent than most and are invaluable helpers. All shadows respect your authority. It does, the possibilities. If he could command natural shadows to move and change shapes according to his will, so many things would become easier. So many things would become possible. And that new and unexpected gift was going to, without a doubt, synergize not only with his familiar aspect abilities, but with his new one as well. Finally, Sonny moved his gaze and concentrated on his ascended ability. The runes shimmered in the darkness. Aspect ability, shadow manifestation. Ability description. You can manifest shadows as tangible objects. Sonny read the description several times over, then froze for a few moments. The visage of the Mountain King being torn apart by tentacles made of pure shadows appeared in his mind. After some time, Sonny threw his head back and let out a loud, triumphant laugh. As his laughter echoed in the darkness, the spell whispered into his ear. Wake up, Sunless. Your nightmare is over. Chapter 745. Freedom of choice. In a dark underground chamber, a metal sarcophagus stood shrouded in silence. Nothing had disturbed the silence, and no light had penetrated the darkness in a long, long time. Until now. Suddenly, the sarcophagus came to life, and a scattering of lights ignited on its surface. A crack appeared on the smooth alloy surface, revealing where the edges of a heavy lid were. The lid smoothly slid away, and a flood of radiant light chased away the darkness of the underground chamber. Cold vapor shined as it rose from inside the sarcophagus. Then, a pale hand rose from within it and forcefully grabbed the metal lip, easily bending its armored alloy. Sonny struggled to climb out of the sleeping pod for a few moments, then lowered his feet to the cool plates of the dojo's floor. A moment later, he swayed and fell down with a yelp. Damnation. Sonny remained sprawled on the floor for a few seconds, trying to understand what had happened and why he suddenly lost balance. Then his eyes gleamed. "Wait, I can speak again. I can speak again." A happy smile slowly appeared on his lips. Of course, he was back to being a human. He had returned to his own body. Trying to move like a towering demon was not going to do his sense of balance any good. With a mad grin, Sonny nimbly jumped to his feet and looked down, enjoying the sight of his slender, pale body. Then he suddenly spun and performed several lightning-fast strikes and kicks. Ah, it is good to be home. He felt so light, so swift, so agile, but most of all, so himself. It was as though a giant weight fell from his shoulders. Quite literally, the shadow spawn must have weighed 3 times what Sonny weighed. Being a tall, powerful devil had its own advantages, but he much preferred his true compact self. Not only was Sonny much lighter, but he also presented a much smaller target for the enemies to stick their blades in. And although having only 2 hands seemed rather inconvenient and silly, shedding the cumbersome shell of the inhuman creature felt nothing short of exhilarating. Besides, now that Sonny was a master, his slender body packed more punch than the shadow spawn could ever hope to muster. Not to mention how in tune it was with shadow essence now, and how explosive the result could be. At the moment, Sonny was incredibly happy with his natural stature and height. Only after being forcefully turned into a lumbering monstrosity did he learn to appreciate all the benefits of being light, nimble, and swift. Inhaling the flawlessly filtered air of the underground dojo, he let out a satisfied sigh and glanced at the crumpled metal of the lip of the sleeping pod. He had inadvertently damaged the armored alloy by simply grabbing it too hard. Getting used to his new strength was going to take some time. For a moment, Sonny felt very disheartened about the damage he had done to the expensive machine. Replacing the bent panel was not going to be cheap. It was well within his means, of course, but still, however, then he tilted his head slightly. Wait, why do I even care? Why would he worry about the luxurious sleeping pod? He didn't need it anymore. He was a master now, a true ascended. If Sonny wished to enter the dream realm, he would travel there physically. His body would not be left empty and defenseless in the waking world. More than that, he could leave the dream realm behind forever. If he wanted to, he could never go back to that hell. He could just remain in the comfort and safety of the real world, enjoying all that it offered thanks to his wealth, citizenship, and social status. For the first time after becoming infected by the nightmare spell, Sonny was free to refuse it. He had won his right to have a choice. He was not a slave to the whims of the world anymore. For now, he could concentrate on his business and open a true memory shop, just like he had wanted. With his accumulated arsenal and knowledge of sorcery, creating a thriving enterprise would not be a problem. Sonny would be able to grow filthy rich and enjoy a lavish or even decadent lifestyle without having to risk his life or think about how to sustain it even again. He could even sleep in an actual bed and see actual dreams. Would it not be a beautifully happy ending for a homeless street rat from the outskirts? Sonny froze, staring into the distance. Slowly, a pale smile appeared on his face. Yeah, as if that would ever happen. Somehow, he doubted that extricating himself from the spell would be that easy. Even if he learned how to manage the unpredictable nature of his fated attribute, there were other factors to consider. As a master with a special strategic asset designation, he was bound to attract the utmost attention of the forces that governed humanity. Neither the government nor the great clans would leave him be, especially the latter. Sonny suspected that he was going to receive a friendly visit from a representative of one of the ruling clans in the near future. Thanks to subtle assistance from Master Jet, they had largely let him be when Sonny had been simply a promising awakened. Now that he proved his mettle and elevated himself to the venerated status of an ascended, the clans would not remain idle. At the very least, they had to pass on a message that trying to become a saint without pledging allegiance to one of them would not be tolerated. And then there was the whole mess with the Night Temple. Saint Tyrus had said that she would smooth things out with clan valor, but Sunny did not know how successful her attempts to shield him from the consequences of Mordred's escape had ended up being. Even though there were no witnesses left to tell the tale of what had transpired in the destroyed citadel, he was hesitant to assume that a great clan had no means of finding out the truth. And finally, there was Nephi's. Even though Sunny was inclined to believe that Changing Star would not abuse her power over him, he could not be absolutely sure. Worse still, whatever certainty he had was based on Nephi's he knew. Who could tell what years of solitude in the harrowing hell of the dream realm had done to her mind? Sunny looked down and then sighed. No, I'll still be rich and lazy one day, no matter what you will all see. His train of thought was interrupted, however, because in the next moment the whole home suddenly shook, and a strangely exhilarated howl resounded from somewhere above. Sunny flinched, then looked up with wide eyes. What the hell was that? Chapter 746. First steps summoning the undying chain and the cruel sight. Sunny bypassed using either the elevator or the stairs, and stepped through the shadows to leave the underground dojo behind. No matter what kind of an abomination had found its way into his home, the creature was going to regret it dearly. For a moment, however, Sunny felt a hint of hesitation. He did not know what had transpired in the waking world during his absence, after all. He had left for the Night Temple 7 months ago and had not been back since. For all Sunny knew, humanity might have fallen in that time. The whole city could have been destroyed, with endless hordes of nightmare creatures stalking the desolate ruins. Any kind of horror could have been hiding in his living room. Well, so what? It is still my living room. No matter what state the waking world was in, anyone and anything thinking that they could simply make themselves at home in a home that belonged to Sunny would have to reconsider their life choices. Ready for battle, he appeared from the shadows and froze. The exhilarated howl grew much louder above ground, but it was not produced by a nightmare creature. Instead, it was produced by Effie. With beads of condensation still glistening on her olive skin, the huntress was standing in the center of the room and howling like a maniac. Behind her, the door of the guest bedroom was taken off the hinges, complete with a large piece of the wall and a chunk of the ceiling. That wall was reinforced with armored alloy, damn it. Sunny stared at his friend in shock, then slowly blinked. Wait, Effie is standing. Indeed, the young woman was standing tall, her long legs appearing healthy and strong. There was no wheelchair in sight. In fact, her whole appearance had changed. The weak, unhealthy girl with pale skin stretching over brittle bones and a twisted spine was gone. Instead, Effie looked almost like she did in the dream realm, tall, attractive, with sparkling hazel eyes and perfectly defined, lean muscles rolling under the dewy olive skin. She was radiating an infectious feeling of vitality and vigor. Everything about her was screaming of strength, potency, and power. The only thing that changed was the length and cut of her hair, as well as the degree of her tan. Before Sunny could realize it, a joyous smile crept up on his face. Of course, the Ascension was a miraculous process. It merged the physical and the spirit bodies together, taking the best parts and perfecting both. Even the lost could return from the dream realm and live in the real world once more after conquering the second nightmare. Effie's disability was no exception to this magical rule. That was the reason why she had always strived to become a master to begin with. A moment later, Effie ended her triumphant howl on a high note and turned around, finally noticing him. Her eyes shined. She took a step forward and grinned brightly. Doofus, I'm walking. Sunny wanted to say something, but then forced himself to look away. He cleared his throat. Congratulations, I am very happy for you, I am. But please, can you put something on? Effie blinked a couple of times, then looked down. In all the excitement, she had completely forgotten to dress after climbing out of the sleeping pod. Her grin turned a little sheepish. "Ah, well, pretend you didn't see anything." Hearing the young woman hurriedly stomp away, Sonny let out a heavy sigh. "I will try," Effie's voice resounded from the guest bedroom. "Sonny," he turned his head slightly. "What?" For a moment there was silence. "Sorry about the doors and the walls," Sonny grimaced. "It's not a big weight walls, as in multiple walls." "What? What the hell did you do?" While Effie was clothing herself, Sonny looked around his house. It didn't change much. In the 7 months that passed since his departure, the cleaning systems had done a good job of keeping everything presentable. If not for the broken door of the guest bedroom and the debris of the collapsed wall laying on the floor, he could have thought that he had left only yesterday. It was a strange feeling. So much had happened, so much had changed. He had changed most of all. He was a master now, and that was perhaps not the greatest transformation Sonny had gone through after living through the Night Temple and the nightmare. And yet, here in the waking world, everything was the same. Everything was unchanged. He did not know how to feel about it. The permanence and safety of his home were very comforting, but they also filled him with a deep sense of resentment for some reason. The contradiction persisted, making him feel confused. Shaking his head, Sonny retrieved his communicator from where he had left it and turned it online. There was a backlog of unanswered messages he was going to have to go through, but right now that did not matter. Only the last message caught his attention. It was from Cassie, containing only a couple of words. "I'm fine." He quickly sent a response and then dialed Kai. His friend answered the call immediately, as if he was waiting for it. The charming young man was already dressed, although his gorgeous hair was wet and messy. In the background, multiple people in stylish business suits were feverishly running around with slightly shell-shocked looks on their faces. They were probably the representatives of his agency and PR team. Kai smiled. "Sonny, what happened? How did the nightmare end? Is everyone all right?" Sonny lingered for a moment. "I am all right. Effie and Cassie are alive and well, too. After you dealt with Sevras, everything went smoothly." The young man sighed with relief. "Thank the gods, but what about?" He grew silent, not wishing to say Mordred's name aloud. Then Kai shook his head. "Actually, don't answer. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The image on the screen of the communicator shifted and then cut off. The last thing Sonny heard was someone's voice yelping, "Mr. Knight, what do you mean? Step away from the window." Sonny lowered the communicator and smiled. A piece of the broken wall caught his eye, laying on the kitchen table. Everything else was perfectly clean and spotless. As Sonny stared at the piece of debris with displeasure, a dark tentacle rose from below and easily swatted it to the floor. Chapter 747. Invisible scars. Usually, it would have taken Kai a lot longer to fly across the city to reach the tranquil terrace district. Not that he would have. But today, the famous idol neglected his habit of staying low and out of sight. It seemed that his speed increased tremendously, as well, because 10 minutes later he was already at Sonny's door. Maybe because of that there was no crowd of paparazzi following him. As they waited for Cassie, Effie rummaged through the empty refrigerator, then walked away from it with a disappointed sigh. "There's no food." Sonny, who was evaluating the damage the boisterous huntress had done to the guest bedroom, glanced at her darkly. "We've been gone for months. What did you expect?" Effie made a sad face, then shrugged. "But I'm hungry." Sonny let out an exasperated breath. "I have some synth paste if you want." She shuddered and opened her mouth to retort, but at that moment there was a knock on the door. If not for the haughty shadow standing guard outside reluctantly, of course, since mundane tasks such as this were grossly beneath it, Sonny would have tensed up. However, he already knew that it was Cassie. The blind girl walked inside, froze for a moment, then raised a deliciously smelling package. "I brought food." Effie threw a quick glance at Kai and grinned. "See, someone has some sense." She did not stare at the archer for long, though. Kai had always been ridiculously charming, but after becoming a master, his looks assumed an almost hypnotizing quality. It was easy to get distracted if one stared at him for too long. In fact, every one of them became much better looking, albeit to a different degree. After studying Kai and Cassie for a bit, Sonny couldn't help but shake his head ruefully, a stunned expression on his face. He finally understood why Master Jet had called herself average when they first met, at least as far as Ascended went. Still, it felt wrong to put the word average in one sentence with someone like her. Jet possessed an intangible quality that no one he had ever met was able to match. The four of them were masters too now, but they were far away from matching her arresting presence. And Sonny himself. He wasn't sure that he qualified to be considered a flower boy, as Soul Reaper had once predicted, but even he couldn't call himself unassuming anymore. The scrawny kid from the outskirts was gone. Instead, a young man with porcelain skin and striking black eyes took his place. Deep in their darkness, visible only to Sonny himself, golden threads of Weaver's forbidden legacy glowed with the flame of divinity. The four of them settled around the table and shared a silent meal. Despite the fact that they should have been exhilarated by their triumph over the nightmare, none of the four seemed too joyous. Well, except for Effie, who couldn't stop grinning and stealing glances at her pristine, vigorous body. The huntress was overflowing with giddiness. The other three, however, just felt hurt, tired, and empty. And why wouldn't they be? Inside the nightmare, there was no time for weakness. They had to carry on no matter how deep the wounds dealt to their souls cut. Now that the danger had passed and the members of the cohort were back in the real world, all those invisible scars were starting to make their presence known. The slaughterhouse of the Red Colosseum, the nightmares, the assault on the Ivory City, all of it was slowly coming back to haunt Sonny. The others had their share of demons to quell, no doubt. After a while, Kai poured himself a cup of tea, looked at Sonny, and asked with uncertainty, "So, what happened?" "I don't remember much after being swallowed by Sevras." Effie dropped her fork and stared at the archer with a stunned expression. "Swallowed? What? You were swallowed by the dragon?" Kai smiled with embarrassment. "Oh, not really. I just sort of jumped into his mouth, because I didn't know how else to kill him." The Effie blinked a few times but didn't say anything. She even forgot about her food for a moment. Sonny looked down, then sighed. "Nothing really happened. I managed to stall the fifth challenger for a while. He fell for my deception because he had assumed that I would not trust anyone with the knives, I think. After you killed the dragon, there was no real reason for him to stay. He left to salvage at least some rewards before the nightmare ended and I crossed to the Ivory Island." He grew quiet for a few moments and then added, "When Sevras died, one of the two remaining chains that held it in place broke. Then the other one did too." The tower rose into the sky, and as it did, the force holding the islands afloat shifted, creating the crushing. That is how chained isles came to be. Hope escaped and the nightmare ended. A somber silence settled over the table. After a while, Cassie asked, So Lord Noctis fell too?" Sonny slowly nodded. "Yes, he asked me to give him the obsidian knife and broke the last chain himself." Effie sighed, then glanced at the cup of tea in front of her. "Damn it. I wish we had something stronger to drink in his honor. Some wine, maybe. Noctis, he was a devious, wicked, two-faced lunatic, but he was also great in more than one sense. You know," she smiled wistfully and then shook her head, "isn't it strange, mourning a figment of the spell? They weren't real after all." Sonny looked down, knowing that Effie was not only talking about Noctis. Then the corners of his mouth curled upward. He raised his cup of tea and smiled. "Actually, I think that enjoying some tea is what he would have wanted us to do. That was his plan, you know. Win a war against the immortal saints, defy the gods, release the demon of desire from her prison, and then have a cup of tea." Sonny took a sip and then let out a satisfied sigh. "So, let's relax and do exactly that. We deserve this much at least. Don't you think?" Chapter 748. Young Masters. Some time later, Sonny left the house and sat on the porch by himself. His thoughts were in disarray. So much had changed, so much had happened. So much was going to happen in the next few days as well. His life was inevitably going to transform, hopefully, for the best. However, there were many obstacles he was going to have to overcome, and many decisions he was going to have to make in order to avoid being destroyed by the changes instead. Although Sonny had grown considerably stronger and obliterating him was not as easy anymore, there were still threats out there that he did not dare to face. He sighed and looked down. I am a master. The knowledge rested in his mind, but he was yet to truly comprehend it. Ascended had seemed so distant and glorious to him once. Not quite demigods, but also not mere mortals anymore. But now, he was one of these venerated beings himself. He could feel inhuman power coursing through his veins. That was something he couldn't process that fast, and yet time waited for no one. Sonny knew that there would be no opportunity to properly get used to his swiftly shifting circumstances. He had a lot to do, and he had to do it now. Just take it one step at a time. What did he have to do immediately? Call Aiko, for one. He had to let his business partner know that he was back and get an update on how Rain was doing. Then discover a way to contact the White Feather clan and find out about the fallout of the destruction of the Night Temple, although Cassie could handle that. Finally, get in touch with Master Jet. For better or worse, she was his handler and his point of contact with the government. If things turned from bad to worse with the great clans, the authorities were the only force influential enough to shield him for a price, no doubt. Sonny grimaced. Not yet, I need to collect my thoughts first. He leaned back and studied the familiar, peaceful landscape of the Terrace district. Despite the fact that the great clans possessed incredible powers, it was not too easy to deal with Sonny and the other members of the cohort anymore. All four of them were masters now, and exceptional ones at that. Not only had they conquered the second nightmare, but they had also done it at an abnormally young age, and after entering the seed one measly year after awakening. The survivors of the Forgotten Shore were already famous, and this latest accomplishment was bound to stir up a real storm, both in the media and behind closed doors. Sonny would not be able to remain fully under the radar anymore, not to mention that each of them received extremely powerful abilities. Effie's was, perhaps, the most remarkable in how useful it was. Sonny had expected the Huntress to receive another combat ability, but instead, her new power appeared to bolster her allies as long as they could see her. It was as though they were receiving a part of her phenomenal, comprehensive physical augmentation. Sonny had experienced that enhancement himself when Effie enthusiastically activated her new ability, and had to admit that it was powerful. Not comparable to what the young woman herself could accomplish, but still significant. What was even more amazing, it could be effortlessly shared with any number of people as long as they maintained the line of sight with the Huntress, without an additional cost in essence. That basically meant that any cohort, any force, and even any army could benefit tremendously from having Effie fight in their ranks. Of course, masters usually acted alone. There were simply not enough masters, and too much for them to do to form full cohorts of Ascended. However, that did not mean that one could not build supporting teams of awakened or even mundane soldiers around them. Sonny had seen exactly that when Master Jet arrived to contain the gate ahead of the government forces. So, Effie was about to get very, very popular among the great powers of humanity. Kai was in a similar situation, although for different reasons. His ascended ability was strange and a little bit frightening. None of them, not even Kai himself, had the chance to explore the full range of its capabilities. However, the potential of what it could achieve was vast. Basically, Kai's voice acquired a supernatural quality that compelled people who heard it to follow his commands. The result and the consequence depended on how much essence he poured into the compulsion and the target's resistance, as well as some other factors that no one understood. Direct commands were hard to force on people with strong willpower or high resistance to mind attacks. For example, if Kai commanded another Ascended to drop their weapon, they would be able to refuse the compulsion. However, their grip might grow weaker, and their attacks might grow slower. The same principle worked the other way around, too. The compulsion did not have to be aimed at an enemy. Kai could call upon his allies to fight with more fervor or to hold their ground no matter what. He could invoke any feeling he wanted in large groups of people, or lure them to their deaths like a siren. That ability made him incredibly valuable for those who held power, as well. The government propaganda machine especially was going to lose its collective mind over Nightingale and his enchanting voice. And there was more. Kai's aspect had evolved after he had faced and slain the Ivory Dragon. Instances like that were known to happen, but were also incredibly rare. His awakened aspect was now ascended, which made his previous abilities more potent, and maybe even introduced new facets to them. The archer had no time to explore these changes yet, so his friends had no idea what the evolution entailed. They only knew that their friend had grown stronger, although perhaps in a way that few would notice. And then there was Cassie. Her new ability was perhaps the most obscure and esoteric. The blind girl herself described it as being able to perceive the world from a different perspective. In other words, she could now use someone else or something else to substitute her senses. She could smell through someone's nose, feel through someone's touch, and see through someone's eyes. While Cassie herself was still blind, she was able to look upon the world again and see what the recipient of the connection saw. The connection could be established with several mediums at the same time, as long as she had the mental capacity to withstand the flood of input. What was more disturbing was the fact that the medium did not necessarily have to acquiesce to the connection, or even be aware of it, although it took much less essence to sustain a connection with a willing recipient. Despite not being too flashy at first glance, that was an insidiously formidable ability. After all, knowledge was the origin of power, and Cassie could potentially become a vortex of it. There were a lot of uses for such an ability, from becoming the connective tissue between the commanders and the soldiers during a large-scale battle to establishing an invisible and undetectable spy network. Additionally, Cassie's first ability expanded once again, now allowing her to perceive not only attributes and aspect names, but also aspect abilities of other awakened. In short, she would be a boon to any clan, great clan, or branch of the government. However, Sunny knew that the blind girl was dead set on remaining independent and continuing to lead the Fire Keepers. Perhaps she would even get a chance, in light of all these revelations. His own ascended ability, shadow manifestation, seemed to have paled in comparison. But that was just if one did not look closer. Sunny suspected that his new ability was much more versatile, insidious, and powerful than that of the other three. And speaking of that, wasn't it time to get to know it better? Chapter 749. Shadow Manifestation. For a while, Sunny silently experimented with his new power. Shadow Manifestation was an interesting ability, especially when combined with the evolved Shadow Control. It was deceptively straightforward, but held so much depth that Sunny wasn't sure that he would be able to figure out all of its potential uses in a short span of time. The fundamental function of shadow manifestation was rather simple. It allowed him to turn shadows tangible. But the devil hid in the details. Now that Sunny enjoyed authority over all shadows, and not only his own, he could manipulate their shape and even make them move according to his will. However, that facet of his aspect had its caveats. Not all shadows were the same. Some were young and some were ancient. Some were deep and some were shallow. Most importantly, some belonged to inanimate objects and some belonged to living beings. Although Sunny enjoyed their respect and reverence, that did not mean that all shadows were going to submit to him implicitly. They simply chose to follow his commands due to his status as the master of shadows, as opposed to being forced to do it. That was not new to Sunny. He had already noticed this pattern of behavior when inviting wild shadows to enter the shadow lantern. Most did it of their own free will, but some obstinate ones refused his invitation. Now that the Child of Shadows attribute had evolved, only the most ancient and deep of the wild shadows seemed reluctant to answer his call. However, not all shadows were wild. That was a term he decided to use when speaking about those of them that were cast by inanimate objects. If a shadow was cast by a living being and connected to a living soul, no amount of authority Sunny had could compel it to abandon or betray their source. So, shadow control only allowed him to manipulate wild shadows. The deeper and older a shadow was, the more concentration it took to command it. He also experienced more strain when commanding distant shadows. Now that Sunny became an ascended devil, the reach of his control extended to almost 10 kilometers. His shadow sense, however, did not usually extend quite that far. His human mind would have been overloaded if it did. So while Sunny could potentially control shadows that were very far away, he simply had no way of sensing them. Unless they were his own shadows, of course, or those he perceived through them. And then came the actual shadow manifestation. Unlike shadow control, manifestation required him to expend essence. The shadows would remain tangible as long as he continued to sustain them with essence and return to their natural state if he stopped. This was both a blessing and a curse. For obvious reasons, Sunny would have preferred to keep his essence. However, there was an unexpected and incredible boon to this ability. Due to the fact that the manifested shadows were suffused with his essence, they assumed its property. In other words, all of them were akin to memories of the ascended rank in terms of durability and resilience. In other words, if Sunny shaped a shadow into a blade and manifested it, the blade would be comparable to an ascended memory in terms of both sturdiness and the damage it could do. But he was not only limited to creating weapons. Shadow manifestation offered him an incredible measure of utility. Since shadows were formless by nature, he could shape them into anything he wanted. He could create barriers, bridges, ropes, suits of armor. The only limitations were his imagination and his reservoir of essence. Hell, he could even create a saddle for Nightmare or an entire house. Of course, nothing came without a cost. The more complex and condensed a shape was, the more essence it took to sustain it. Creating a simple shadow tentacle was not too hard, but imbuing it with enough solidity to cut through an enemy like a sword was much more taxing. Manifesting deep and ancient shadows also took a toll, although they were more powerful. And lastly, all the things he made tangible were able to move on their own, as long as their shape allowed it. A sword was not going to fly on its own, but a manifested shadow could move around and grab his enemies. That was not a very efficient form of attack in most cases, however. Each shadow possessed its own level of strength, which was usually not too high. Sunny was far away from being able to rip an awakened tyrant to shreds for now, and unless he really wanted to. By experimenting a little, he found out that he could enhance the might of the manifested shadows by pouring more essence into them. The more force he wanted to exert above their natural threshold, the more essence he had to burn. That would not have been too powerful in the hands of an average master, but Sunny was a devil. He had vastly more essence than almost any other master had at their disposal. If he really wanted to, he could exert truly monstrous strength through his manifested shadows. Even though that would be grossly inefficient in terms of essence expenditure, he felt very happy to have such an option. who wouldn't want to rip enemies apart without having to lift a finger. Even if there were many easier and smarter ways to kill something, very few were as cool and as devious. Apart from the wild shadows, Sonny could also manifest his own. In fact, doing so was much easier, allowed him much better control, and demanded much less essence to be used. For a few moments, he imagined summoning Gloomy, Happy, Creepy, and Haughty, arming them with shadow blades and making them fight in his stead. What a sight that would be! However, after thinking for a bit, he decided that this was not a very good idea. There was a very simple reason for that. While tangible shadows could affect the real world, they could be affected in turn. Manifested shadows could damage his enemies, but could also be damaged instead. Since his shadows were deeply connected to his soul, making them vulnerable to physical attacks was a very stupid thing to do. Sonny did not even want to think about what would happen if one of them was destroyed. At most, they would be able to perform simple tasks that did not pose any risk. Overall, Sonny was very happy with his new aspect ability. It was powerful and versatile, providing him with potent means of both attack and defense, as well as incredible utility. What made him especially happy, though, was how perfectly it synergized with the shadow lantern. Shadow manifestation had only one apparent weakness: the fact that he would not always be surrounded by shadows. Without anything to manifest, its worth was almost non-existent. Unless he wanted to risk his own shadows, of course. However, that weakness was made moot by the shadow lantern. With its help, Sonny could carry an infinite amount of shadows with him at all times. No matter where he went, he would never be without their assistance. He would never be a master without servants. Wherever Sonny went, a swarm of shadows would follow. Chapter 750. Home. Sonny remained on the porch for a while longer, thinking about nothing in particular. He wondered about the future and about the past. What had happened to the real Noctis? What had happened to the real Hope? What had really happened to her cursed kingdom? He had seen the corpses and Sevras and Sun Prince in the dream realm. However, Solving had still been alive. The obsidian and the ivory knives had never been used, hinting that the real events of the liberation of Hope had been both similar and vastly different from how they had transpired in the nightmare. Had Noctis succeeded in his ambition to make a deal with Weaver? Had the demon of fate helped him find a way to break the eternal shackles of Hope without using the knives? If so, had the sorcerer, perhaps, survived his mad rebellion? What price had he paid? Of course, Sonny knew that there were no answers to his questions. He was never going to learn the truth. The events he had lived through in the nightmare were too distant and shrouded in too much mystery for him to discover it. As he thought about all these things, a familiar figure suddenly appeared on the crosswalk. A teenage girl with pale skin and black hair was walking back from school, a somber expression on her face. Noticing Sonny, she froze for a second and then suddenly sprinted over. Halfway to the porch, Rain remembered herself and slowed down, awkwardly trying to hide her excitement. She stopped near Sonny, hesitated for a moment, and then hit him on the shoulder with her little fist. Where the hell have you been? Are you back? You were gone for so long." Sonny leaned back and grinned. "Hey, Rain, of course I am back, can't you see? As for where I was, I just visited a temple. Then I went on a little cruise. Then I visited a couple of towers, spent some time in a theater, befriended a horse, lived in another temple for a while. Finally, I visited a very pretty city and got to know its rulers. Why, did you miss me?" Rain stared at him for a few moments, then scoffed. "Me, huh? Why would I miss you of all people?" She grew silent, looked down, and then added shyly. "Well, maybe I did miss you a tiny bit. My new tutor is a very respectable awakened, but he is not at all as fun as you." Sonny looked at her for a few moments and then smiled. "An awakened, huh? What a pity. I am a master now." Rain froze and threw a shocked glance at him. "You are a master, as in an ascended. Wait, what?" His smile slowly grew smug. "Indeed I am. Do you know what that means?" She hesitated. "What?" Sonny leaned forward and said in a friendly tone. Why, it means that my lessons will be much more expensive, of course. He laughed, then grew silent and added after a short pause, "Oh, also I might have missed you a tiny bit too." A dark river flowed through a cavernous expanse of black stone. Fog nestled on the water, stifling its quiet murmurs and veiling everything in white. A lone source of light was traveling through the fog, tearing a path through it. It was a slender gondola cut from onyx, with a glass lantern hanging on its bow. A pristine white flame burned within the lantern, straining against the confines of its crystal prison. The fog opened up before the gondola, and then silently closed behind. A young woman with silver hair and ivory skin was curled into a ball, sleeping on the bottom of the onyx boat. In the stark light of the lantern, her face seemed deathly pale and vulnerable. On the stern of the gondola stood a skeleton dressed in rags. He was working the oar, staring into the fog or at the young woman. Despite the fact that the skeleton had no lungs, no lips, and no tongue, he was humming a song. One day the gods will fall and reveal their lie, the one who sleeps will awaken to devour his children, and us all that which was forgotten will be remembered and consume the world, all of us will dream the nightmare of the forgotten god. As he sang, the young woman stirred and then slowly opened her eyes. The skeleton grew silent, glanced at her, then said, "Good morning, creature. How have you slept?" She sat up straight and did not answer, staring at the skeleton with tired gray eyes. The boatman waited for a bit, then shrugged. "Are you feeling well? You have not been speaking much these past few weeks, creature. Has your mind finally gone?" The young woman remained silent, making the skeleton uncomfortable. He shook his head. "Something about you feels different today. Your shadow, it seems to have grown deeper. How peculiar." There was no answer. They continued to sail in silence for a while. Slowly the fog receded, revealing a black shore. The skeleton changed the course of the boat and let it drift until its bottom scraped against the rock. There he let go of the oar and sighed. "This is it, creature. That is as far as I go." The young woman remained motionless for a while, then stood up and touched the lantern, letting the white flame travel from it to her palm. After that she jumped onto the shore, staggered, and slowly straightened herself, looking into the darkness. Finally she spoke. "How close are we to that place?" The skeleton shrugged. "Close enough, I'd wager. Sorry for lying to you, by the way. In my defense, you only have yourself to blame, creature. Who would be foolish enough to believe that anyone can cross the underworld? This place is not the likes of us to traverse. Getting this close to its inner border is already a miracle." He hesitated for a while, then added, "Are you sure that you want to go on? There are worse fates than death, creature. Trust me, I should know." The young woman glanced at him, then asked, "What about you? What will you do?" The skeleton laughed. "Me? Oh, I don't know. Now that I've been taken off that damn tree, there's not much time left for me to exist. Maybe I'll try to find what remains of the Shadow Realm to have a proper death. Maybe I'll just go back and tease Azarax for a while, one last time. That fellow was really insufferable, you know. Spending an eternity in his company was the greatest punishment of all. A piece of advice: choose your eternal companions carefully, creature." The young woman lingered for a few moments, then nodded and walked into the darkness. Her steps were steady. Then, without turning her head, she said, "Thank you, Uris. Farewell." The skeleton watched her go and then sighed. "What a foolish abomination. Still, I wish her luck. Even though I don't know what she seeks, I hope she finds it." As the young woman walked further and further away, the light of her flame grew distant and dim. The darkness surrounded the skeleton, and the white fog flowed slowly in his direction, as if wishing to consume him. Uris watched the fog draw closer and then sighed again. "She is not as foolish as me, at least." Then the white mist swallowed him, and his voice abruptly fell quiet. Soon, impenetrable darkness reigned the cold river once again. And far in the distance, a lonely spark of light continued to climb higher